Vess could think about possibly replicating Lucky's gems in the distant future. The tech involved in this incredibly deep and profound process was probably anything but simple. He instead turned his thoughts towards his more immediate concerns. If he had a choice, he would have preferred not to utilize any of these gems. Considering Lucky's continued lack of productivity, the supply of gems was truly too low to satisfy all of his needs. Their greatest value lay in their ability to elevate the quality of a Mech past the masterwork threshold. This was the most critical usage of these gems, and the more powerful their effect, the greater their ability to transform what would otherwise be a serviceable Mech into a stellar work of craftsmanship. Aside from that, these gems could also provide his most important Mech pilots a powerful boost in battle. Mech such as the Amaranto and the Riot possessed considerably more combat power than they had any right to be due to the unusual gems he added to their construction. Vess counted Patriarch Reginald as one of his friends, so he did not actually object too much to giving away such a valuable asset. It was also clear that any of his gems would have the greatest effect on the most powerful individual Mech in the Golden Skull Alliance. Boosting the performance of any aspect by 30 to 50% would make a much more drastic difference if it was applied to an ace Mech, as opposed to an ordinary bright warrior Mech. Yet as Vess stared at the mysterious gems that had also caught the attention of Patriarch Reginald and Master Benedict, he hesitated whether he should go through with this step. If the upcoming confrontation between the Mars and the Neo Amadeus represented a design duel between their respective Mech designers, then Vess would have preferred it if he could win this contest by relying on his own design efforts. Putting in a gem produced by his cat did not reflect his core design skill. It was an external object that enhanced the performance of a Mech through a method that he did not understand and could not replicate through his own effort. In other words, it was a cheat. His honor and integrity as a Mech designer detested the thought of relying on such a means to win a design duel. Victory would have no meaning if Vess tainted the process with an external factor. However, Vess quickly squashed this misguided sentiment to the back of his mind. So what if he was cheating? So what if the improvement provided by Lucky's gem was not strictly honorable? This was war. There was no place for fairness on the battlefield. Vess had overcome so many adversities and vanquished over so many opponents because of his willingness to use any means possible to gain advantages over his enemies. If the upcoming clash between ace Mechs was part of a formal design duel, then Vess probably wouldn't have tainted his integrity as a Mech designer through this method. Yet just because he equated it to a design duel did not mean this was actually the case. The battle at the top needed to be won at all costs. When Vess was about to put his life as well as the lives of his wife and children at stake, there was no excuse to deprive the Mars of a massive power-up. He did not even object to relying on additional means to interfere with the duel and tilt the battle in the favor of his side. For example, if the Sundered Phalanx was not able to match the expert Mechs of the Golden Skull Alliance and the Hex Army, then Vess had no qualms about ordering Venerable Davia Stark and Venerable Isabel Cotin to attack the Neo Amadeus from a distance. Even if an ace Mech was easily able to repel the attacks from the Amaranto and the Promethea, if the distraction caused St. Jeremiah to split at least 5% of his attention and power to fending off the incoming energy attacks, then that was more than worth the effort. Ultimately, his responsibility as a leader compelled him to use one of his precious gems on the Mars. The stronger the Mars, the greater the chance it could defeat the Neo Amadeus. Once Patriarch Reginald won this duel, he could instantly let loose on the expert Mechs and the ordinary troops of the Sundered Phalanx, harvesting hundreds of enemy machines with each passing second. As an ace hybrid Mech, the Mars was actually much more comfortable with slaughtering tides of weaker opponents. In addition to rolling over the Mech units of the Sundered Phalanx, the Mars could unleash its great offensive might against the Titan shields that protected the critical space stations of the Cosmic Ring. Once the Mars was able to break them all open in quick succession, the orbit of Pima Prime V would no longer be able to offer as many defensive advantages to the defending forces. The sooner all of this took place, the shorter the time that the expeditionary fleet got exposed to deadly fire. Many Larkinsons, including Vess and his family, no longer risked calamity at this point. Considering that his very life was at stake, Vess no longer had any objections to this course of action. What Vess was more concerned about right now was how he could possibly explain his intentions. These gems defied reality to such a degree that it could shake up the entire Mech industry if everyone learned of their existence. By now, both Reginald and Benedict had come close enough to get a good glimpse of the 4 shiny gems. Neither of them were average people. As people who had come much closer to hitting the ceiling of a pre-divinity life form, their perception and intuition were much stronger than that of average people. "What did you bring out, Vess?" Master Benedict asked. "From the way your demeanor has changed, I surmise that they do not merely serve a decorative purpose." "I can sense power in these gems," Patriarch Reginald simply stated. Vess looked at the ace pilot in mild surprise. "That's sharp of you. You're right, Reginald. These gems are special. I won't say much about them, but I am comfortable enough with the 2 of you to reveal that these gems can bring an additional boost to the performance of a Mech. Each gem can improve a specific aspect. What are the requirements? How much power do they consume?" "There are no requirements other than that the Mech has not previously integrated one of these gems. They don't consume any power either. They are completely self-contained and are easy to install," Vess answered. That did not satisfy the master Mech designer at all. Benedict bombarded Vess with a torrent of questions, each of which was met with answers that sounded more and more incredulous to the older Mech designer. Master Benedict had encountered a lot of fantastic innovations and wonders over his long career, but he had never come face to face with a small and unassuming item that could unconditionally improve the performance of major Mech systems in such a ridiculously easy manner. The man clearly did not believe in all of the outlandish claims, but Vess offered a simple answer. "The Quint, the Dark Zephyr, the Amaranto, the Riot, the First Sword, the Shield of Samur, and the Evertshanger are just a handful of Mechs that I have enhanced through this method." This caused Master Benedict to fall silent. His formidable mind went to work as he recalled the past instances where he had witnessed the amazing performance of each of these Mechs. Although there was a lot of weirdness involved with Vess' work, certain performance characteristics could not be fully accounted for. There was a limit to how much true resonance, living Mechs and design spirits could enhance the performance of a machine. When Master Benedict compared the aforementioned Mechs to the other works of Vess, it became clear that the first 6 expert Mechs truly performed abnormally well. Perhaps ordinary Mech designers might not be able to make this observation, but master Mech designers were different. Now that Vess explicitly pointed it out, Benedict finally understood why he had always felt that the Larkinson expert Mechs were a bit too exaggerated in terms of their performance. The Dark Zephyr was a bit too nimble. The Amaranto inflicted noticeably more damage. The Riot was unpredictable. The First Sword was abnormally capable of cutting through obstacles. The Shield of Samur's metaphysical growth was too fast. As for the Evertshanger, Master Benedict's eyes twinkled in an unusual manner before he looked up at the Mars. He no longer doubted Vess' claims. "If your gems can truly strengthen the Mars, then that would be a boon to our cross clan. We will owe you another favor if you are willing to share this benefit with us. We stand a much better chance of surviving the upcoming operation with this additional guarantee. However, the decision does not lie with me. Ultimately, it is up to Reginald and the Mars to decide whether they want to obtain this power. They will also have to conduct last-minute practice in order to acclimatize themselves with the latest improvements as soon as possible." Both Vess and Master Benedict turned their attention to Patriarch Reginald. The ace pilot threw a brief glance towards the Mars and scoffed. Obviously, the Mars did not get a say in this matter. When Vess studied the Mech that he had once imparted with life, he couldn't help but feel sad. The unusual collision between Patriarch Reginald and the Mars during their first interfacing attempt ended up badly for the latter. The personality and character of the latter became so suppressed by the newly advanced ace pilot that there was no measure of equality between the pairing. Whereas people like Venerable Joshua and Venerable Janzi had no qualms about treating their living Mechs as equals, the Mars had practically devolved into Patriarch Reginald's machine servant. The growth pattern of the Mars had become completely distorted as a response. Vess never accounted for this possibility and did not have any good solutions for the living Mech to regain its dignity. Which of these gems should be added to the Mars? Patriarch Reginald eagerly asked. As an ace pilot, any performance improvement to his ace Mech was a cause for celebration. He couldn't wait to pilot his Mars again after it had been enhanced to a further degree. Vess thought for a moment. Each of these gems can improve your ace Mech in different ways. It doesn't really matter which one you choose as long as you are satisfied with your choice. Since you can feel them out, try and focus on them and feel which one speaks to you the most. Surprisingly enough, Patriarch Reginald did not take a long time to make his selection. He only stared at them for a few seconds each before he announced his preference. "This purple one resonates the most with me," he said as he expressly picked up the shiny gem with his fingers. "I can sense that the other ones will not disappoint me if I make use of them, but this one is more special. I have a feeling that this gem longs to prove itself in battle the most." Vess did not expect that Reginald would base his selection based on this reason, but it fit with his character. The fury of an unwilling warrior is stored within this gem. Increases the damage of all energy weapons of a Mech by 50%. When Vess studied the gem one more time in order to confirm its properties, he felt it was ultimately a good choice. Not only did its personality match with that of Reginald, but the offensive boost it granted to the Arceus system of the Mars expressly strengthened its primary role. As an offensive Mech, it was natural for the Mars to excel in launching attacks. Strengthening its powerful array of transphasic integrated energy weapon hardpoints not only increased its chances of defeating enemy ace Mechs, but also allowed the Mars to gain a lot more lethality against alien warships and other powerful threats. Vess smiled. "Good choice. Let's install the gem into the Mars and test out the difference. I can already promise you that you will not be disappointed with the attack power of your ace Mech." Integrating the Rage of IF gem into the Mars made an enormous difference to the Golden Skull Alliance. The Arceus system of the Mars was already considerably powerful due to its extremely high specifications and the fact that it integrated 650 grams of face water in total. The designers of the Mars would have to make far too many sacrifices in order to increase the firepower of the Mars by just 5 or 10%. Yet after successfully installing a single gem in the ace Mech, its firepower truly increased by 50% without any side effects. During a few short but highly impactful testing sessions, Master Benedict's jaw dropped so many times that it should have been dislocated by now. The Master Mech designer simply couldn't explain how such an unassuming object could produce such a massive difference. "This doesn't make any sense," he roared as he studied the incoming telemetry and sensor readings. "The Arceus system isn't consuming any additional power. Its efficiency hasn't increased. All of its parts are exactly the same. The magma vein system and the index system are both operating exactly as before. Heat levels have remained within normal parameters. How can the output of all 9 integrated energy weapon modules increase by a factor of 0.5? There isn't even any variance in the amplification factor between the different hardpoints. The tiny energy weapons mounted on the head of the Mars have been boosted by the exact same proportion as the main energy weapon module mounted in the middle of the chest. Perhaps a younger and less accomplished Mech designer may have been ignorant and flexible enough to accept the changes without asking any critical questions, but master Mech designers were different. Their understanding of Mechs had reached an insanely high level, and it was because of their strong ability to comprehend their mechanisms that they could not handle these situations well. It would have been one thing if Vess brought out an alien device, salvaged from an alien ruin, or a product of high technology that he had redeemed from the MTA. At least there was a solid technological basis that Master Benedict could eventually deconstruct and reverse engineer. This was different. The gem was not only as small as a thumbnail, but also did not contain any obvious presence of mechanical components, advanced circuitry, or pocket dimensions that could be hiding an enormous machine. It was just a gem. Vess looked at the increasingly more unhinged master with evident amusement. Even people at this level could still be stumped by unexplainable phenomena. Don't bother yourself too much over my gems. You need to possess a certain kind of expertise in numerous obscure fields before you can unlock the truth about them. As good as you are at designing mechs, I doubt you have been able to master every field of science like the polymath. In fact, Vess doubted whether the polymath was up to the task of cracking the secret behind Lucky's gems, but he did not need to mention that little detail. Master Benedict eventually closed his eyes and sighed. You are correct. I suppose you know better since you hold them in your possession. I am still curious about them. Are you open to trading one of them to me? I will owe you another favor. No thanks. Vess shook his head. It's not easy for me to get my hands on them. If it wasn't for the risk factors of Operation Saturday Market, I wouldn't have chosen to offer one of them to you guys. In fact, a part of him even regretted the decision to allow Patriarch Reginald to choose his own gem. Though the Rage of If gem undoubtedly matched well the Mars, the problem was that its compatibility with the Promethea was even higher. The fire-oriented expert rifleman Mech placed an even greater emphasis on energy attacks. It did not have any good offensive solutions aside from relying on its luminar crystal rifle and flamethrowers to defeat its opponents. The Mars was a much more rounded Mech in comparison. Though the Arceus system was its bread and butter, it possessed so many other options to beat up its opponents, such as its transphasic axe and its powerful shotgun. Given how the design of the Mars was stuffed with so many powerful transphasic Mech systems, Vess would have chosen to integrate it with the tier of Nuri's gem that could directly increase their overall performance by 25% across the board. Vess did not actually regret the current outcome, though. If the origin or the character of the gem also played a hidden role in how it functioned, then it obviously made sense to match an aggressive gem with an aggressive Mech pilot. Besides, the tier of Nuri's gem was also powerful in its own right. It was not a bad choice to reserve it for the moment he was able to develop another Facewater super Mech comparable to the Mars for his own clan in the future. After confirming that the Rage of If gem did what it was supposed to do, Vess no longer paid attention to the Cross clan and went back to handling his own affairs. Time continued to pass until all of the primary fleet elements of the Golden Skull Alliance and the Hex army gathered together in an empty star system. At this location, they were only one FTL transition away from entering the Pima Prime system. If they wanted to, the combined assault fleet could still change course and head to other, more vulnerable star systems. Rotes, Yuma, and New Rams remained attractive choices, but the attackers could also opt to attack many other core colonies within the Friday colonies if they wished. Still, most of those choices weren't port systems, which meant that it took a lot more time to reach those targets. If all of the starships chose to travel to Pima Prime at this junction, then that was the equivalent of crossing the Rubicon. There was no turning back from this point. All of the leaders of the Golden Skull Alliance, as well as the Hexer General in charge of the massive Hexer Task Force, gathered together one last time to confirm their decision. Of all of the people who had gathered in the conference chamber aboard the Mother's Wrath, the massive flagship and fleet carrier of Task Force Fury. Only 3 of them were powerful enough to affect the actions of the combined forces. Patriarch Reginald's ascent was absolutely crucial. His role was so important that his disapproval could single-handedly sink this entire endeavor. Vess held significant sway in both the Golden Skull Alliance and the Hex Federation, so his voice was also fairly great. Mech General Aliski Victrix officially led Task Force Fury that the Hex Army had formed for the upcoming operation. As her name suggested, Aliski Victrix was a member of the highly militant Victrix matriarchal dynasty. Not only that, she was a member of its main branch, which meant that she possessed the background and prestige to command all of the scattered Hexer Mech divisions, whether they came from the Vraken matriarchal dynasty or the Wadden dynasty. To be honest, Vess did not have a good impression of General Aliski Victrix. It started with her matriarchal dynasty. The Victrixes had an awful reputation among outsiders. The stories about how they castrated all of their boys, diminished their proportion of the total population within their territories to just 30%, and never extended any courtesy towards the male prisoners of war that ended up in their hands were not rumors, but facts. Though Vess had heard that the Victrix matriarchal dynasty had gone with the times and phased out a number of their ridiculous policies, he had little doubt that a lot more needed to happen before boys were able to regain their dignity. To be honest, Vess did not even look up how the boys under the Victrixes fared in the Hex colonies. He was afraid he might stumble upon unpleasant news that would cause him to revise his decision to fight alongside the Hex army. In any case, the new trend had already been in motion for a number of years. The less extreme and more secularist groups of Hexers, such as the Vraken matriarchal dynasty, had shifted faster than the other ones. Eventually, even the Slowpokes had to complete the reforms. It would be unacceptable for parts of the Hex colonies to remain stuck in the past. The other matriarchal dynasties would certainly put a lot of pressure on the more backwards Hexers to change their ways. This was a matter for the future, though. For now, Vess and everyone else in the combined fleet had to accept the fact that the Hex army put General Aliski Victrix in charge of Task Force Fury. Problematic origin or not, her competence could not be called into question. There were many prominent Mech generals in the Hex army that had proven their ability to keep up with the enemy during the Komodo War, and General Aliski was definitely a suitable choice. According to the Glory Seekers, General Aliski was a firebrand military leader who constantly advocated for proactive action over passivity. She had first earned her chops during the early stages of the Komodo War. The Mech units under her command blitzed through the territories of the Carnegie Group, smashing aside the defending fortune Legion time and time again. Each star system occupied by her command eventually turned into ruins that were filled with bodies, and especially male bodies. In the later stages of the Komodo War, she had done her best to reverse the losing trend by organizing and launching desperate counterattacks. Though most of those attempts failed in the end, General Aliski still earned a lot of appreciation from the higher-ups for her earnest efforts to swing the war back into their favor. A high-risk, high-reward attack attempt, such as Operation Saturday Market, was right in her ballpark. Her rich track record for brute-forcing her way through fortified defenses and leaving absolute devastation in her wake was exactly what the leadership had in mind for Pima Prime. According to our scouts, spies, and informers, the Gage dynasty has not made any unexpected movements during this period. The Friday men have not conducted any major troop transfers or made any significant alterations to their defensive setups. General Aliski Victrix spoke in her steely voice. If this is the case, Operation Saturday Market will proceed to the next phase as planned. Any objections? No, Patriarch Reginald spoke. Let's get this show on the road. The sooner I can challenge Jeremiah Gage, the better. His eagerness to test his mettle against the Gage dynasty's trump card had risen to a meteoric height now that his Mars turned into an even greater powerhouse than before. You will have your wish, Patriarch. General Aliski reassured the ace pilot in a patronizing tone. The female leader clearly regarded the cross patriarch as an attack dog that could go out of control as soon as he slipped his leash. Of course, it would be ideal if General Aliski was the person holding the leash. I don't have any objections either. Vess shared his opinion. The only concern I have is that we should make certain that we are fully able to monitor all of our possible escape routes. Achieving a victory in Pima Prime is only half of the battle. Getting out alive, and without bumping into any further Friday Men units, is another ordeal. Once we suffer significant losses in the upcoming battle, we will likely lose a lot of deterrence. If there is any chance for the Friday Men to pool their forces together and drive us into a trap, it would be after we have finished our jobs. Our preparations are sufficiently thorough in that regard, General Aliski said in a neutral tone. This is far from the only deep strike operation that we have launched against the Friday Men. Besides, with how cowardly, treacherous, and selfish the different coalition partners have behaved up until this point, they won't have the guts to intercept us after we have demonstrated our overwhelming superiority in Pima Prime. Vess truly hoped that was the case. Papa. Yes, my cute little pumpkin. Will we win? Victory is never certain, Andrast. While we have done our best to prepare for our upcoming offensive operation, no one can ever say for certain which side will win. The red-haired girl, cradled in the arms of her father, looked down at all of the Mechs that were undergoing last-minute tweaks and adjustments for the battle ahead. There was little that Vess could do at this stage. The people involved in the offensive operation had already formulated enough plans. Now, they just needed to follow the script and execute them all while remaining open to changes. The spies lurking in the Pima Prime system had yet to detect any major movements. Though the sundered phalanx Mech units entered into a state of higher alert and intensified their security protocols, it did not appear that the Gaugers thought that the invaders would have the guts to attack their core colonies, let alone their crown jewel. With everything going according to plan, Vess was left in a rare period where his presence wasn't particularly needed. A clan with over 600,000 members was different from a group that merely numbered in the hundreds. The former possessed a lot more layers in the hierarchy, and each person on the latter possessed their own strengths and responsibilities. Vess was not a military officer, so he barely possessed any ability to contribute to the complex operations of a major military action. General Verl and his formidable staff already covered all of the high-level tasks, while the individual Mech legions easily took care of the smaller chores. Though Vess could have spent his time in the design labs and finished his current batch of design projects, he was in no mood to think about his actual work when he was on the eve of commencing a hostile attack. He found that spending time with his family was an excellent way to soothe his nerves and keep him occupied. This time, he thought he would give his second daughter a little tour through the spirit of Bentheim and allow her to witness all of the clansmen preparing for battle. Ship engineers meticulously inspected all of the shield generators and other essential defensive systems of the factory ship. Logistical personnel brought out tons of energy cells, ammunition racks, and other essential supplies out of deep storage. The administration did its best to calm the civilian population and transfer vulnerable clansmen from the smaller starships to the larger and more defensible ones. All of the activity opened up young Andrast's eyes. Though she was far too young to understand the full context behind these actions, she was sensitive enough to sense the solemn and humorless mood among the personnel. The difference was quite obvious to a kid. Normally, the Larkinsons were much more relaxed and at ease. Now they acted as if a dark cloud hovered over their heads. The specter of death frightened them. Each of them became acutely aware that they were heading right into the jaws of the Gage dynasty. Whether they could break the teeth of the most powerful coalition partner of the Friday Coalition, or get chewed up by the formidable Hexer killers, would become clear in a week. "What is your favorite Mech, Andrast?" Ves playfully asked as he rocked his daughter in his arms. That one, it's so pretty. It did not surprise Ves at all that her finger pointed straight towards a Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II. Yeka, Andrast's companion spirit, suddenly emerged from her head and voiced her support. My. Emro tilde. Blinky appeared from Ves' head and eagerly dove in to lick Yeka's intangible fur. My. Hihitty, Papa, don't lick me so much. I'm your daddy, little pumpkin. I'll lick you whenever and wherever I want. As Ves and his feisty daughter continued to fool around, a new presence quietly emerged behind his back. Ahem, what is the meaning of this, brother? What are you doing to my lovely niece? Helena. Ves paused in his effort to shower his baby daughter with kisses and turned around to see that Helena had manifested herself. As usual, the young lady in black exuded a still and stagnant aura. Most people would feel uneasy at the sense of doom and gloom that the design spirit naturally invoked due to her unsettling domain. Fortunately, neither Ves nor Andrast were average people. Andrast's eyes even lit up after seeing her favorite intangible relative. Heli. Andrast somehow managed to squirm out of her father's grasp so that she could run up and get picked up by manifested design spirit. Heli. It cost a lot of energy for Helena to interact with the material realm due to her nature as a spiritual entity. As a pure energy life form, she needed to concentrate a lot and burn an excessive amount of energy just to lift a small child with her arms. Nonetheless, Helena did not act frugally just so that she could hold and embrace her relative. The Larkinsons prized family above all, and Helena was no exception. Her aspiration to become an authentic goddess of death was just a job description to her. She was way less scarier if people bothered to get to know her in person. It was a pity that most people either got frightened to death or prostrated before her when she appeared in front of their faces. This was why she cherished her family even more. If she didn't have Cynthia, Ves, or Andras to grounded her, she probably would have grown up into a much more somber and lonely daughter of death. It was not a coincidence that Helena appeared at this time. How much help can you provide in the upcoming battle? Ves asked. Not as much as you wish, but more than you expect, she answered. What does that mean, exactly? Well, I can pull off a few tricks here or there, but it is difficult for me to exert any influence if I don't have any anchors nearby. The spiritual entity explained even as she tickled Andrast's cute nose. I can probably exert the greatest effect on the battlefield when a lot of Valkyrie mechs have gathered in a single place. I was born at the end of the Komodo War, so I never got to test what I could do when millions of Valkyrie mechs deployed in space at the same time. The Valkyrie mech line was easily the most favorite product of the Hex army, though the latest batch of mech models had quickly built up their share of fans as of late. Still, Task Force Fury easily carried tens of thousands of copies of the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II and its numerous variants. Can you kill people without the help of a battle formation? Ves asked. Technically, I should be able to do so, but in practice it's too difficult. Helena shook her head. I'm not a full god yet, and it is hard for me to affect the souls of enemies by myself. In addition to that, I have learned that when people are trained, disciplined, and in a state of high stress and excitement, it becomes several times harder for me to overcome their resistance. So, in short, you're too weak to give us a hand. Hey, I'm still a goddess in training, you know. Not even our mother can do much better in the same circumstance. Space outside the Nyxian Gap is too rigid and unfriendly towards our kind. I truly can't understand why the barriers between the planes of reality are so strong outside of my birthplace. Ves snorted. It's probably a good thing that is the case, or else every galaxy would get flooded with would-be gods that try their best to suppress reason and promote ignorance in our society. You traitor! Don't you want your mother and I to be able to manifest easier and spend more time with family? No thanks. While I like the occasional visit from you, I don't think the rest of my clan will be able to handle frequent visits. Spoil sport. Helena drowned her sorrows by playing with Andrast for a while. The two female Larkinsons continued to generate giggles and joyful banter as they shared their love for each other. Can you do anything else to help us out in the coming battle? Vess asked his eldest sister. I would really appreciate it if you can give my troops a hand. You sound awfully worried for your soldiers when you and your buddies are the ones that actively push to take part in this attack, Helena retorted. When you send your soldiers out to war, you need to accept the fact that not all of them will return alive. I know that, but I take no pleasure in this. To me, all of this is necessary to temper my troops and prepare my clan for the turbulent times to come. I thought the MSDS of yours already took care of that. I kind of like teasing innocent Mech cadets and grumpy Mech pilots as little Helly. I've made sure to put just enough fright into your Mech pilots to respect the power of death over their own lives. You've done a great job over the years. I won't deny that, Helena. However, I haven't invested so much in their training and Mechs just to achieve better scores in simulation programs. They are meant to be my instruments and should be utilized in ways that bring me profit. The potential benefits of winning this battle is enormous, but this is also the first real battle after our clan's 5-year-long rebuilding and expansion phase. The more insurance I can add, the better. So that is what you're seeing me as. Am I just a security blanket to your fragile and sensitive Mech pilots? Vess did not look amused at her tone. Cut the crap, Helena. You know what I want. Can you offer any additional help that can tilt the battle in our favor? Think about this. The worse our Mech units will fare in the upcoming battle, the greater the chance the enemy will be able to attack this ship directly. Not only will this expose me to danger, but all of my children, including Andrast, will also land in the crosshairs of the enemy. Don't forget that the Friday men absolutely hate my guts. They will never miss an opportunity to aim at my life. The daughter of death frowned a bit. Andrast noticed the change and poked Helena's cheek with her tiny finger. What's wrong, Helly? Oh, nothing much. Your father is just being a bother right now. He isn't confident that he can clean his own mess, so he thinks his eldest sister can bail him out of his predicament. Can you, Auntie? You're so cute when you call me that, Andrast, Helena gushed as she planted another series of kisses on her niece. Well, I have been thinking about what I can do. There may be one way I can give our side an advantage on the battlefield. Vess grew intrigued. Tell me more. Helena gestured towards the death lotus that she pinned on her hair. Is it possible for you to make a large gun or cannon that is tied to my death lotus? If you can make one for one of your expert Mechs, I may have an easier time in lending my strength to your troops. That is an interesting idea. Why didn't I think about this before? The death lotus was Helena's primary weapon, but it was also a living spiritual product in itself. Even though Vess had made it so that it wasn't as sentient and expressive as Helena herself, the death lotus was technically an existence that was equal to his other design spirits. If this was the case, Vess could fabricate an artifact similar to the Hammer of Brilliance or the Rod of Ilvain that was especially attuned to channeling the power of Death Lotus. I need to start my design work right away. Time is ticking, so I need to design and fabricate this new weapon as soon as possible. Vess found a new project to occupy himself with after his talk with Helena. Though Operation Saturday Market loomed closer than ever, he no longer spent as much time on worrying about the sundered phalanx Mech divisions his troops had to fight against, or whether the Neo Amadeus carried any nasty surprises. Instead of worrying about matters that he had no control over and could not meaningfully affect with his intervention, Vess instead returned to what he was originally good at, which was creating groundbreaking new innovations. Of course, given the time constraints, Vess knew he had to work extremely quickly in order to design a functional product and fabricate it before the decisive battle commenced. Vess quietly drafted up a list of requirements as he carried his cute little daughter to the design studio. He put her down a floating kiddie chair and quickly began to draft a concept of what he had in mind. "What are you doing, Papa?" Andrast curiously asked as she grew fascinated by how Vess drew glowing lines in the air with his mind and fingers. "I'm making a flower, a deathly flower, kind of like the one I made for Helena, but at a far bigger scale." His little girl looked impressed. "Woo-oh." Naturally, Helena appeared as well. Vess carried a totem of his eldest sister on his person, most of the time so that she could manifest in his presence whenever she wanted. As the principal design spirit who would be lending her death energy to this hypothetical new product, Helena gained a huge personal interest in the outcome of this project. She exhibited a similar interest in the work of her brother when he had tackled the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II project in the past. That had been a fun time. While Vess and Gloriana had mostly focused on updating the older rim-level Marauder Mech design up to Heartland-level specifications, Helena provided numerous suggestions on how to better allow her to channel her death energy through the Mech line that she had inherited from her mother. She also insisted on cosmetic changes that better reflected her personality. For example, each copy of the Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II and its variants carried a decorative black lotus on their upper torsos. Now, Helena looked to repeat that experience. Any weapon based around herself or her death lotus needed to be pleasing to her eyes before she was willing to extend her blessing. "What are you making exactly?" she asked. "A Mech pistol," Vess answered. "One that will vaguely resemble your death lotus when it is in its weapon mode, but scaled to the proportions of a Mech. Of course, its internal design will be a lot different because it is not a spiritual construct like your personal weapon. It has to be a real luminar crystal weapon that is especially attuned to channel your specific energy." This was not an easy task. Vess had never developed a weapon that was completely centered around the idea of channeling the energy of a spiritual entity. He never developed the need to create such a weapon because his mechs already possessed all of the weapon solutions they needed to defeat their opponents. However, considering the formidable reputation of the Sundered Phalanx and the many dangers of fighting against so many veteran, battle-tested military mech divisions, Vess felt ill at ease with the current situation. Though there weren't any obvious indicators that showed that their predictions were off, Vess couldn't help but worry about the amount of casualties his clan would suffer in the ensuing combat. There were plenty of possibilities where Operation Saturday Market succeeded, but only after the Larkinson clan lost over half of its Mech pilots. Vess also considered possibilities where the Sundered Phalanx gave up all pretense of defending the Pima Prime system and went all out to destroy the spirit of Bentheim and the other vulnerable starships of the Larkinson clan in an act of retribution. The Gaugers might even do their best to aim at his life and the lives of his immediate family. In the past few weeks, he had spent a considerable amount of his time bolstering the stealth detection measures of his flagship and all of the other capital ships. The senior-level stealth and cloaking skill that he had acquired from the System 2.0 came in extremely handy during that time. Vess became a lot more assured that his fleet would be able to detect any sneaky bastards approaching his flagship, while most of his clansmen were preoccupied with the enemies in the open. He never got over that instance where a whole bunch of Harumak cultists were crowded in the same compartment, but somehow pulled off a trick that caused him to overlook their presence. With all of the additional precautions he made, he was certain that this would never happen again, especially on the spirit of Bentheim. After a few minutes of hasty sketching, Vess completed his initial draft of his proposed weapon design. It looked like an elegant black pistol at first. It shared obvious resemblances to the Death Lotus, which in turn was inspired by the Amastandira. Unlike Helena's favorite flower, the Mech pistol he drafted did not come in an alternate lotus form. He didn't think it was necessary to add a transformation function. Mechs carried weapons all the time. They only looked more awesome when they carried an additional gun. Besides, it was much easier to add a transformation function to a spiritual construct than on a solid object. Unless the latter was made of smart metal, It was incredibly troublesome to design a pistol that could transform into a flower shape. The amount of mechanisms he needed to add was excessive, and he would be forced to make so many compromises that the firepower of the weapon would definitely suffer. The last reason why he skipped the transformation function was that it added way too much time to the design process. An energy pistol was one of the simplest weapons that he could design. Vess was extremely familiar with luminar crystal weapons of all kinds. His last significant Mech design project, where he had to explore and push the limits of what he could do with luminar crystal technology, was the one that resulted in the nullifier model. Vess applied the lessons he learned from designing the nullifier and many other recent ranged Mech models to the initial design of this new black pistol. Helena and Andrast both watched on as Vess zoomed in on the internals of his draft and began to draw crystals and other essential components to make the weapon work. The two young ladies did not understand anything about the science and engineering behind what Vess was doing, but that didn't stop them from voicing their appreciation. "Pretty," Andrast giggled as she clapped. I want it. Papa, give me one, I want to shoot." Vess grinned and leaned over to kiss her adorable cheek. Hee, let's wait until you've grown a little older. You're too young to hold a real weapon. Let's wait a few more years and I'll prepare a special gift for one of your birthdays. Is that all right?" "I want it now." Vess had to spend a bit of time to placate his daughter before he could resume his design work. He not only refined the initial appearance of the pistol, but also detailed its core components so that he could gain a better estimate of its technical performance. Energy weapons could be quite complex, but one of the charms about luminar crystal technology was that it made several conventional components redundant. Luminar crystals designed for different functions could wear multiple hats at the same time, so Vess could not only spend less time on designing a weapon, but also simplify its design. Another benefit to weapons based on luminar crystal technology was that they were remarkably efficient. Luminar crystals were extremely good at converting electrical energy to pure output without generating too much waste heat. This allowed Vess to place much less emphasis on heat management, as his luminar crystal weapons simply didn't overheat as much. The only major concern was that crystals endured such great strain when converting one form of energy into another form of energy that they could break after enduring constant stresses. Still, everything was fine as long as Vess put a ceiling on the power output of his weapons. All of this happened to make luminar crystal weapons particularly suited for compact weapon designs. When it came to outlining the attack phase crystal, which was one of the key components that defined the performance of the weapon, Vess paused for a time. "What are you hesitating about, Vess?" Helena curiously asked. If I want to design a pistol that can effectively channel your death energy, then I can't rely on conventional luminar crystals," Vess answered. "The attack phase crystals that I have developed before mostly output conventional energy, such as laser beams, positron beams, and kinetic beams, which are all great at dealing material damage. None of the existing attack phase crystals that I have made in the past focused purely on channeling spiritual energy." Before Helena's birth, the idea did not sound practical. Though there were design spirits that could probably inflict at least some hurt on people, the price-to-performance ratio was far too low to make it worthwhile. For example, if he tried to make a luminar crystal weapon that channeled the spiritual energy derived from the illustrious one, then he would probably end up with an over-engineered flashlight that could only blind people at best. Helena thoughtfully rubbed her smooth, porcelain chin. "So you have to invent a new attack phase crystal in order to get the pistol to do what you want." "Yup. Do you know how?" "Not really," Vess admitted. "This is the greatest hurdle to my project. I know that the Luminar race used to be able to leverage spiritual engineering in their Luminar crystal products, but I don't have that knowledge. I will have to spend my limited time on research and experimentation to whip up something quickly." That sounds like it would take weeks or months instead of days. Do you even have enough time to complete such an important task? Helena asked in a skeptical tone. Vess slowly grinned. If I was working on my own, then I probably wouldn't be able to get it done in time. However, when did I say that this is a solo project? Don't I have you, Helena? You're the daughter of death. There is no one else in my orbit that knows more about death energy than you. As long as we work together, we'll be able to crack the secret sooner than later. Helena blinked. While that may be true, I'm not a maker like you. I don't know the first thing about crystals and luminar crystals, let alone all of this engineering stuff. Don't worry about that. I can already cover this area, and if that's not enough, I have another crystal expert at my disposal. You mean that illustrious one fellow? Helena frowned. He's weird. He's derived from a couple of long-dead aliens. Of course he's weird. It doesn't matter as long as he lends his expertise on luminar crystal technology to me. His knowledge base might not be complete, but he possesses a much greater affinity for luminar crystals than myself. I will need to borrow that in order to succeed. Is that all? Do you want to bring over our mother as well? No, Vess shook his head. She will probably refuse to give me any helpful information as usual. I have another assistant in mind that is much more helpful for our project. In fact, I would say that he is made to develop unique relics like these. Who? Me. Really, Vess? Vess chuckled for a moment. I mean it, Helena. Of course, I am not referring to my base self. I am instead referring to Vulcan. This was an excellent opportunity for Vulcan to finally put all of the knowledge that he had absorbed from lots of craftsmen, Mech designers, and other worshippers of his totems over the years. In the past, Vess engaged in many collaborative design projects. He usually worked with different combinations of lead designers to design a lot of different mechs. The selection and configuration of every design team differed based on the needs of every project. For example, when Vess wanted to update his Transcendent Punisher design to modern standards, there was hardly any point in pulling in melee mech specialists such as Caddies and the Power Pair. The general rule was that up to 5 mech designers could effectively impart the strength of their design philosophies onto a mech design. Vess usually attempted to fill up all of these slots whenever possible, but it was a lot easier for people like him or other mech designers to make their mark on a mech design if they did not have to share so much. In any case, the new weapon design project that he had spontaneously started was different from all of his previous projects. His express goal was to design a powerful weapon that could expressly unleash pure beams of death without demanding too much from Helena. Though he had witnessed instances in the past where Helena was able to fire a powerful concentrated beam of death in the material realm with the help of her Death Lotus, the efficiency was simply too low under ordinary circumstances. Perhaps she might be able to save a few people in an emergency, but she would only exhaust herself trying to do so over the course of a massive mech battle involving hundreds of thousands of mechs. If Vess wanted to give his clan the ability to repeatedly fire beams of death without squeezing Helena dry or straining her to exhaustion, then he had to create a weapon that could bridge the gap between the material realm and the imaginary realm. Luminar crystals happened to be the key medium that could make this possible. Their reactivity to spirituality at least opened the door to such an application. All Vess had to do was to invent a new kind of attack phase crystal, preferably within a single day. Vess already recognized that he did not have the expertise and understanding to complete this kind of research by himself. This was why he thought about doing something that he had rarely done in the past, but should have done more often due to how useful it was to work in this way. He formed a design team composed of himself and a bunch of design spirits. It was quite difficult to make this team productive at first. I don't know anything about science and engineering. I'm a goddess. I simply make stuff happen, Helena complained. Hashdalar and Hashandalar. The illustrious ones silently communicated in a way that only Vess could clearly understand. "That's not the way you should design a Mech pistol," Vulcan complained, while swinging his intangible blacksmith's hammer. "It's way too skinny to endure the rigors of battle. If you want to make a relic that lasts forever, then I insist on thickening up its body." Vess let out a breath in exasperation as he rubbed his palm against his face. An hour hadn't even gone by after he brought all of these design spirits together, and already they were bickering with him and each other about countless little details. None of them were on the same page. This wouldn't have happened if he worked with professional Mech designers who were accustomed to working alongside their colleagues. "Quiet, everyone," Vess eventually shouted. "This isn't working. Time is short. We need to complete a weapon before our fleet is about to engage the enemy at Pima Prime V. Please bear with me as I try another solution. Blinky, come out, you lazy cat." "Emro." The purple star cat floated out of Vess' head while letting out a yawn. It looked as if he had just woken up from a pleasant cat nap. "I need you to form a design network with everyone here. This is the only way we can effectively pool our knowledge and coordinate our design work." Blinky blinked as the companion spirit directed his gaze at Vess, Helena, the illustrious one, and Vulcan in turn. "I'm being serious, Blinky. I know you've never done this with me and a bunch of design spirits before, but there's a first time for everything. Just make sure to limit the connections so that I won't get flooded with too much incomprehensible data." "Emro." Blinky did as instructed, taking extra care to limit the amount of data throughput over the spiritual bonds. Spiritual entities were much different from organic life forms, such as Vess. The latter were largely constrained in their thinking by the finite capacities of their brains. The former did not have to deal with those limitations and could easily scale up the magnitude of their thinking processes so long as they had the spiritual energy to spare. What this meant was that it was quite dangerous to form an unregulated spiritual bond between normal people and spiritual entities. So-called gods could quite literally crush mortals to their deaths with the magnitude of their mental activity. At first, Blinky definitely experienced a lot of strain. He actively had to shrink the bonds and implement more filters in order to make the design network bearable to Vess. Once Blinky got everything right, Vess simply sat in his seat and took in all of the new input while actively sharing what he wanted to accomplish with his weapon design. There had been instances in the past when Vess actively embodied a couple of his design spirits by channeling them directly with his mind and spirit. The experiences back then were much different because Vess actively tried to align his thoughts with the spiritual entity in question. This time, Vess tried to maintain his own persona and mental state as a Mech designer, while opening himself up to other influences to broaden his horizons and recognize new possibilities. It was working. As Vess gathered all of the unique knowledge and perspectives of 3 different design spirits, everything mashed together in a way that allowed him to notice a lot more details about his weapon design that he had previously missed. Vess concentrated on the attack phase crystal that he wanted to make. The biggest problem with it was that no matter what kind of materials he used to synthesize a new luminar crystal, it probably wouldn't be capable of effectively channeling death energy. What he needed was a spiritually reactive material that was compatible enough to Helena that it could impart this key quality to an attack phase crystal. Wait a second. He paused for a moment before a black alloy bar spontaneously appeared on the work table in front of his seat. Helena immediately perked up when she felt an instinctive affinity for the new object. She hovered closer and experimentally poked it with her finger. Much to her surprise, it easily sucked in and stored her death energy. With the help of the design network, Helena already had a good idea on what it was and what Vess had in mind for this material. Can you truly combine this black demon steel into the right crystal? It's worth a try, Vess responded. I will have to experiment and develop the right combination and proportions of different materials. I'm not starting from scratch, though. The light beam attack phase crystal most closely resembles what I am looking for. If I take it as my starting point and swap out one material for black demon steel, I can probably make a working crystal. After that, I just have to keep adjusting the proportions and such until I end up with the most efficient implementation. This was exactly what he proceeded to do in the following 2 hours. Blinky kept up the design network in order to keep the design spirits engaged and invested in the weapon design project. The first-class lab machines that he had acquired a while ago facilitated his work enormously. He had also spent a bit of his MTA merits to acquire additional lab and workshop equipment that were specifically developed to produce crystals. This allowed him to produce dozens of different samples that slightly differed from each other. Vess' approach towards this exploration process was fairly simple. He made a minor change to a single variable, and if that caused the next crystal to perform better than before, then he would make the change more drastic and see if that led to further improvements in performance. Once that stopped happening, Vess knew that he had hit a sweet spot and proceed to change another variable and start the process anew. This was hardly the most ideal and effective process, to be honest. Vess might have been able to find an adequate sweet spot the first time, but overlook a superior one if he had just pushed through. There were also instances where he could create a more perfect sweet spot if he made a lot of changes that did not seem beneficial at first. However, all of that took a lot of time and calculation work. For now, Vess would be happy with a quick and dirty solution as long as he ended with a weapon that was strong enough to change the course of the upcoming battle. "All right, I think I have found a good enough crystal formula," Vess announced as he held a small gray crystal in his palm. Based on the principles that allowed his luminar crystal weapons to fire light beams that dealt a lot of damage to spiritual targets, his new attack phase crystal successfully channeled and fired Helena's death energy in a way that was practical enough for his needs. Vess glanced at the large amount of lab mice and other test animals that the design department routinely kept in stock. Each of the unfortunate creatures were technically still alive, but all fell into a coma as their spirits had all been wiped away by the tiny crystal. "That's interesting," Helena remarked. "The crystal itself has actually harvested small fragments of the spirits of those poor animals. I think that might be useful." Vess nodded in agreement. "I think I have a few ideas on how I can leverage that, but I don't have the time to explore any further. I need to complete the design of the Mech pistol and fabricate it. I want to complete a basic product first. I can think about upgrading it later on, when I am not so pressed for time." He proceeded to do just that. Blinky no longer maintained the design network as Vess finalized his black pistol design. He had gotten what he wanted from the design spirits, and none of them were needed anymore after the end of the design stage. Helena, the illustrious one, and Vulcan still stuck around, though. They were incredibly curious to see what their collective efforts had yielded. While this was not the first time that Vess had blended obscure forms of spiritual engineering with conventional engineering, it was probably the more extensive hybrid development project he worked on up to this point outside of Mech's. Vess hardly even paid attention to the news that the combined attack fleet had successfully arrived at the edge of the Pima Prime system. General Aliski Victrix, General Verl, and all of the other military higher-ups had everything in hand. Since it took a decent amount of time to enter the inner system, sweep up the outlying settlements, and shoot down isolated space stations, Vess still had enough time to fabricate a working Mech pistol and test out its performance. "I have a feeling that this weapon is worthy to be called a relic," Vess stated to his fellow collaborators. "Black Demon steel is anything but ordinary, and using up 2.5 kilograms is just enough to produce my newly developed gray beam attack phase crystal that can fit inside a Mech pistol. If he wanted to make a larger weapon, such as a luminar crystal rifle or luminar crystal cannon, then he would have been forced to make the attack phase crystal larger, thereby reducing the proportion of Black Demon steel in the object. This would have caused the larger weapons to perform little better than a pistol. Therefore, Vess might as well settle with the most compact form. This made it smaller, lighter and easy to carry for many different mechs. I can't believe you, Vess. Instead of taking care of your actual responsibilities, such as leading our clan in a moment where we have entered an active war zone, you instead squirrel away in our private workshop just so that you can work on your latest obsession. Vess completely ignored his wife's complaints as he gazed appreciatively at the end product that he had meticulously handcrafted in cooperation with Vulcan. He had been able to elevate the quality a lot more than usual with the active assistance of his design spirit. Ever since Vulcan acquired the Heart of Steel and the new mantra associated with it, his affinity, understanding, and workmanship with metal had reached an entirely new height. To be honest, he would have been able to grow his Heart of Steel to a considerably stronger state if he practiced the mantra, but the stubborn design spirit insisted on modifying to his own needs. This was probably one of the reasons why the new Mech pistol hadn't been able to reach the masterwork threshold. Of course, the main reason why the new gun did not reach the second rung of the craftsmanship ladder was because it was a rush job. If Vess had an extra week or month to develop a better version of the attack phase crystal or optimize the design of the whole pistol, then he would have probably been able to make a much more exquisite work. As it was, the iteration that Vess ended up with attracted both admiration and disgust from his wife. While Gloriana was able to appreciate the forward-thinking aspects of its design, she also grew aghast at all of the corners that Vess had cut in order to. Read novel Fulmy. You should have involved me in this project, Vess. I could have done a much better job at perfecting its design. And delay its completion for at least several weeks. No thanks, honey. I can manage it myself. I'm the Mech designer with the greatest expertise in luminar crystal technology, after all. It is also not a personalized weapon that is especially tailored to any of our expert Mechs. This new relic weapon is meant to be compatible with all humanoid expert Mechs, whether it is the Dark Zephyr or the Shield of Samur. Vess had actually taken a liking to developing this kind of Mech equipment. The intimate cooperation with his design spirits, along with the use of rare or exclusive materials, resulted in the creation of a brand new weapon that was both powerful and unique. Unless he was able to get his hands on another batch of Black Demon's steel, there was no effective way for him to make a second weapon of this kind. The best way he could make a weapon that was close enough was to find a substitute material that possesses similar properties to Black Demon's steel, but neither Vess nor anyone else in his clan specialized in this kind of research. In any case, that did not diminish his enthusiasm for this sort of side project at all. As long as the end product was powerful enough, it was worth it for him to spend a significant portion of his time and resources into making these so-called relic weapons. Vess briefly thought about all of the other rare or unique materials that were available to him. He recalled that the Larkinson Biotech Institute still had large quantities of fish whale meat and bones in cold storage. While a part of these organic materials had already been used up in different development projects and experimental research activities, there were so many tons of them left that he was glad to get rid of the rest, to be honest. Once the Trailblazer expedition kicked off in earnest, Vess expected to fill up all of the storage spaces with much more valuable loot. Clang! Gloriana punched the rear of his unending regalia with her suited first. Are you listening to me, Vess? Sometimes I can't believe how distracted and scatterbrained you can be. This is probably one of the worst possible moments you can choose to shut yourself off from reality and lock yourself up in your own little world. The fact that you did so without involving me makes it all worse. Vess turned around and leaned over in order to lock Gloriana in a surprise kiss. This was certainly an excellent way to shut up his wife, provided she didn't bite his face apart. Quiet, Gloriana, he said as he retracted his lips. Nothing bad happened in the last few days, am I wrong? The clan is in good hands and I don't need to hold everyone's hands all the time. We haven't arrived in orbit of Pima Prime V just yet, so the chance that something will happen is fairly low. MMPH, you rascal. Once his wife calmed down, Vess finally had an opportunity to introduce his work properly. "You have the honor of witnessing the first of a series of relic equipment for Mechs," Vess proclaimed as he waved his arm towards the large, gray-coated weapon. "Why call it a relic?" "Because it is both valuable and one of a kind," he said. "I have come up with more ideas about developing other powerful equipment for Mechs, but I will leave that for another time. Why doesn't the color of your final product match your design? Isn't it supposed to be black?" "It is, but then I thought that it resembled Helena's Death Lotus a bit too much. Since it spits out gray beams of death with the help of its new attack phase crystal, I thought it would make more thematic sense to coat it in this color." "So what is its name?" "Gray Lotus. It doesn't need to be more complicated." When Vess compared the design of the Death Lotus in pistol mode with the design of his new Gray Lotus, he found that they matched quite closely. This was deliberate on his part, because the Gray Lotus was supposed to echo the Death Lotus. With the help of the new Gray Beam attack phase crystal, as well as other spiritual engineering shenanigans that Vess had hastily cobbled together, the two lotuses had formed an active spiritual bond. Vess looked at the time and noticed that Gloriana did not seek him out without reason. A lot more time had passed. It would only take one more day before the combined attack fleet was ready to attack Pima Prime VA. This left him with precious little time to test out the weapon in its complete form. In fact, he probably wouldn't be able to preside over the testing session in person. He turned to his wife. "Can you handle the follow-up process for my Gray Lotus on behalf? I'm not asking for much. As long as the pistol is effective enough to be used against sundered phalanx, I will be happy." "I can do that," Gloriana answered in a reluctant tone. "Which Mech do you want to bestow this weapon? The Evertshanger?" Vess shook his head. "No, this is no time to play favorites. Venerable Joshua already has more than enough power at his disposal. It will have to be an expert melee Mech because the Gray Lotus is just icing on the cake to Mechs like the Amaranto. The Dark Zephyr, maybe. The Mech pistol is a handy weapon to wield at close range, and it vastly increases its versatility." That was a good suggestion, but Vess eventually shook his head. "Maybe it is useful to equip the Dark Zephyr with the Gray Lotus in some situations, but don't be deceived by its relatively compact size. This gun consumed a lot of power. It's the only way to make it powerful and sustainable enough to be useful in Mech combat. The Dark Zephyr simply can't supply enough juice to keep it firing often enough to be useful in an extended battle." One of the brilliant successes that he had achieved with the development of the Gray Lotus was that it successfully reduced the load on Helena. The weapon did so by substituting a portion of her death energy with conventional energy. Instead of sucking Helena dry, the Gray Lotus induced a smaller load on her energy reserves. Meanwhile, the special attack phase crystal also drew in electrical energy from other sources and effectively amplified the original output of the Mech pistol. The resulting gray beam possessed slightly different properties than a gray beam, but to Vess, it was just as lethal to organic life forms as Helena's original attack methods. "Then what else do you have in mind, then?" Gloriana placed her hands over her hips. "In my opinion, there is nothing better than the Dark Zephyr. They are almost a perfect match in my eyes." "I was thinking of handing it over to either the Riot, the Shield of Samur, or the Blade Chaser Mark Roman II. These were all great choices in his opinion. The Riot would definitely be fighting against many enemy expert Mechs, so equipping it with an extra weapon gave Venerable Orphan a way to poke at targets that were out of range. The Shield of Samur was the guardian of the main fleet and was the final line of defense against any threats that sought to decapitate the Larkinson clan. Venerable Janzi might be an obstinate fool at times, but she always abided by her duty. The Blade Chaser Mark Roman II also had a responsibility of defeating a lot of enemy expert Mechs. The difference between it and the Riot was that Venerable Iman Ingvar possessed wonderful synergy with his sister. When Vess thought about the Blade Chaser Mark Roman II, wielding the Grey Lotus while it and its pilot was commandeered by Commander Kaesela Ingvar, and the Minerva. The new relic weapon would perhaps be capable of outputting the maximum possible damage in the upcoming battle. Gloriana likely had the same idea in mind, because she made the same suggestion. I think the Blade Chaser Mark Roman II is a good alternative, but only if Venerable Iman Ingvar is open to using a ranged weapon. That won't be a problem, I think. Iman may be a mule head, but he's not a traditional swordsman. As long as I come up with an argument that is centered around protecting his precious sister, he'll likely agree. Let me handle this, then, Gloriana offered. Even I can pull off this argument. You should go back to where you belong and take charge of everything. You can't remain absent in these kinds of situations. Now go make your presence known and function as the figurehead of this entire operation. Okay. Vess left the design lab after entrusting the remaining handling of the Grey Lotus to his wife. As he headed to the bridge of his flagship, he quickly called General Verl to get appraised with the situation. So how are we doing, Verl? Nothing that merits your immediate attention, sir, he said. Aside from entering a higher state of alert, our forces have been standing by without incident. Task Force Fury, under the lead of General Aliski Victrix, has been sweeping every outlying settlement, space station, and other construct in our way. What about the defending troops? The sundered phalanx has moved exactly as we expected. The Gaugers aren't even making a pretense at defending their exposed holdings. They have all been evacuated in advance with whatever valuables they can bring away in a hurry. The bad news is that the local troops are all converging onto Pima Prime V in order to make their stand at their most important and best defended stronghold. We have a hard fight ahead of us. The enemy Mech divisions will be able to confront us in their peak conditions. A pity. Whoever is in charge is not an idiot. Are there any unexpected surprises that I should know of, General? There are a certain number of foreign visitors in the star system. Many of them are trade convoys that are guarded by a considerable amount of escorts. There is a chance that the Gage dynasty might hire or outright commandeer them in order to bolster their immediate defenses. I see. I've read about this in one of the reports. Is it likely that this will happen? It depends on how desperate they are, General Verl stated. Our spies are monitoring this development closely. So far, a lot of foreign trading fleets have evacuated in haste, but there are a number of them that are slower to move. I am afraid that we may have to fight thousands of additional Mechs. Damn. The witches have come. From the moment the local authorities detected the arrival of an enormous fleet that was projected to carry well over 200,000 threatening Mechs, it was as if a bomb had exploded throughout the Pima Prime system. In fact, it was not just the millions of colonists in the star system that reacted with a combination of shock and dread at the news. The rest of the Friday colonies, and even the entire Friday coalition back in the old galaxy, all became gripped by nightmares of the Komodo War. Had the remnants of the former Hexadric hegemony gone crazy? It was one thing to launch opportunistic raids at the vulnerable and frankly overstretched outlying outposts of the Friday colonies. It was another thing to launch a bold and brazen assault at the richest, most valuable and most developed stronghold in the colonial state. For years, a significant portion of the economy of the Friday colonies centered around Pima Prime. The Gage dynasty poured so much investment in the port system that it had quickly turned into a major trading nexus, as well as an industrial powerhouse. By drawing in a lot of resources and converting them into vital processed goods, such as strong alloys, powerful Mechs, and vital starships, Pima Prime had quickly risen up to become the biggest economic engine of the Friday colonies. Read novel Fulmi. This granted its residents an unsurpassed sense of superiority and security. None of the Gaugers that had taken the opportunity to apply for transfer to the Red Ocean ever thought that an enemy would dare strike at Pima Prime directly. Not only was it located in the interior of the Friday colonies, but also hosted a vast array of defenses. every important settlement and major city district enjoyed the protection of formidable Titan shields. Around 14 formidable Mech divisions and a scattering of other miscellaneous units of the sundered phalanx were garrisoned at Pima Prime. The Cossack ring that had taken up a lot of valuable construction capacity over the years had steadily grown more challenging to overcome. The ring of space stations and defensive platforms surrounding Pima Prime V could even be observed with the naked eye at certain times of the day. Along with the awareness that St. Jeremiah Gauge, one of the supernovas of the last war, watched over the entire star system, had given its residents the impression that the risks and dangers of the red ocean simply did not apply to them. They all believed themselves to be better than the other poor folk that had to endure the constant fear of getting targeted by pirates, aliens, or other frontier scum. They lied to us. Pima Prime was supposed to be one of the safest harbors of the Friday colonies. Have the Hexers programmed the wrong coordinates in their navigational systems? They can't attack us. They are crazy. Have they forgotten about our saint? Why haven't they chosen to attack Rote Suma or New Rams instead? I should have stayed home like a good boy, instead of accepting a 20-year contract to help build up our colonies in the Red Ocean. What the local residents could not come to terms with was how the Hex army skipped over all of the other weaker colonies in the entire region and aimed their offensive straight at the strongest pillar of the Friday men's colonial ambitions in the Magyar Middle Zone. Not even the aliens dared to confront Ace Mech so easily. Many times these angry but powerful aliens underestimated the comparatively tiny Mech that produced all kinds of anomalous fluctuations, and many times the aliens learned why high-ranking Mech pilots were so revered in human space. It did not take much time for many people to figure out why the Hexers were so confident about provoking St. Jeremiah Gauge. What the hell is the Golden Skull Alliance? Wait, this private group actually has an ace pilot. I've never heard of that. Damn, St. Reginald used to be a member of the Garland Empire. Every Mech pilot from that state is mad, and that counts double for their high-ranking Mech pilots. As the prospect of a dramatic escalation in hostilities between the Friday colonies and the Hex Federation began to dawn upon all of the citizens, many of them quickly sought to secure their own safety by whatever means possible. Passenger vessels became stuffed to the brink of overloading their life support systems as the most wealthy and well-connected colonists quickly secured passage out of the star system. The local administration also acted quickly and activated the appropriate contingency plans. Though the people in charge of the important port system still maintained their confidence in their own defenses, they nonetheless contracted or commandeered every single trading vessel within reach. Hasty movements took place as the local factories and other critical production centers quickly transported their most valuable and critical goods and industrial assets into one cargo hold after another. We don't have any cargo space left. Then make more room, you useless oaf. We are not leaving until we are able to load this 3D printer into your ship. It is worth over 40,000 MTA credits, and we are not leaving it behind for the Hexers. Though the sudden evacuation proceeded more chaotically than planned, the Gaugers nonetheless managed to transfer a lot of valuables to various different starships on short notice. In line with the attitude of hoping for the best and planning for the worst, a lot of assets that were prohibitively expensive or difficult to replace were sent out of Pima Prime as soon as possible. As the cargo ships headed towards the nearest Lagrange points in order to transition out of the star system as soon as possible, a few of them began to encounter hostile Hexers way in advance. What? How can the Hexers be here already? Where did these women come from? Wait, those combat carriers. They're the warp ravagers. Just minutes before the first attacks arrived, Hexer-built combat carriers had whizzed across space at a pace that allowed them to exceed the speed of light. This not only enabled the special squadrons of the Hex Army to enter the inner system without any warning, but also put them into positions where they could intercept crucial cargo vessels carrying goods worth at least hundreds of millions of MTA credits. As the Valkyrie Mechs and other fast and maneuverable Hexer Mechs rapidly approached their prey, they either hijacked, looted, or outright blew apart the cargo ships, depending on the circumstances. Whenever the sundered phalanx dispatched nearby patrols to intercept the Hexer Mechs and starships that were wreaking havoc to the evacuation plan, the culprits in question all warped away well in advance, making it nearly impossible to chase after the destructive Hexer units. The abrupt raids that had begun well before the main invasion fleet had arrived at the doorstep of Pima Prime V, generated a lot of commotion within the floating palace of New Beginnings. No cargo ship leaves Pima Prime without escorts. System Governor Mabrius Gage dictated, "We cannot allow the Hexers to set our development back further." But, sir, the more escorts we assign to the outgoing cargo ships, the less matched we have left to defend Pima Prime V. The appointed governor of the port system did not show any signs of panic or consternation. As a stalwart who had lived for over 2 centuries, the leader entrusted with taking charge over the Gage dynasty's holdings in the Magyar Middle Zone knew it was crucial for him to maintain his composure. Still, the dilemma he was faced with troubled him to no end. The Hexers may be aggressive, but underestimating them often led to disaster. Since this had all of the appearances of a well-planned offensive operation, the Hexers must be confident in their ability to overcome the defenders. If that was the case, then the Gaugers needed to do their best to minimize their losses by evacuating as much critical industrial equipment as possible. As long as those productive assets made it all the way to New Rams, then the Gage dynasty would still retain enough industrial capacity left to make a possible comeback in the future. However, with the infamous warp ravagers of the Hex army harassing their evacuation lines, it became a lot more dangerous to proceed with this action. The warp ravagers are a problem. The governor of the powerful and wealthy port system stated the obvious. Of all of the Hexers that have harassed the Friday colonies over the years, the most infamous and feared ones belonged to the warp ravagers. Officially, the warp ravagers constituted a new special operations unit within the Hex army. In reality, the warp ravagers merely gathered the most bloodthirsty and aggressive Hexer soldiers who were filled with hatred towards the Friday men. When these ferocious soldiers obtained control of special combat carriers that were equipped with additional standalone warp drives, they eagerly took revenge against the Friday men for the outcome of the Komodo War by raiding the shipping in and around the Friday colonies. Though the various forces of the Friday coalition tried to catch and corner these raiders whenever possible, the warp ravagers hardly suffered any losses over the years due to the enhanced mobility of their warp-capable combat carriers. Now, these professional raiders openly taunted Pima Prime's defense forces by performing their raiding activities barely a stone's throw away from Pima Prime V. Unfortunately, space was big, and it took a lot of time for the local patrols to rescue the beleaguered trading vessels. "What do you think, cousin?" Governor Mabrius Gage asked in the open. The powerful presence of an ace pilot who had interfaced with an ace mech spread across the main hall of the Palace of New Beginnings. Though the ace mech wasn't visible, the system governor knew that the Gage dynasty's trump card was hidden in a secret space that was built right in the middle of the floating palace. "There is no room for half-measures." St. Jeremiah Gage voiced his own opinion. "The Hexers are too strong for that. Trying to have it both ways will only result in ending up with nothing. Either we make a stand with everything that we have, or abandon Pima Prime to the mercies of the Hexers." Though the ace pilot gave the impression that the Gaugers had multiple options, in truth, there was only one viable choice that Governor Mabrius could take. "The Gage dynasty never flinches from the Hexers," he declared as his courage and his fury towards the Hexers flared. "We have defeated the Hex army in the past, and we shall defeat it once more. We cannot afford to lose everything we have built in Pima Prime, and we must not besmirch our reputation by losing a battle against our archenemies. Our honor and our duty demands that we must hold our ground and protect our colonies to the last man if need be. Not a single soldier in Pima Prime is allowed to retreat. It was politically and culturally unacceptable for the soldiers of the sundered phalanx to surrender or run away from this massive clash. The lives of millions of citizens who have settled on Pima Prime V were at stake. Governor Mabrius Gage and the rest of his leadership council would become the sinners of their dynasty if they failed at this junction. St. Jeremiah Gage apparently liked what he heard from his uncle, because his combative aura began to expand until it enveloped the entire palace of new beginnings with the desire to fight the Hexers to the death. Good. I have always felt we have left the job unfinished by leaving the Hexers in the Red Ocean alone. Now that they have brought the fight to us, we can finally begin to exterminate this misandric scourge from human civilization. This battle shall be the beginning of the end of the Hexer people. As the Gage dynasty hastily prepared to meet the invaders in battle, Task Force Fury continued to make a huge mess of the star system. Dozens of trade ships got ruined. The warp ravagers did not distinguish between ships hailing from the Friday colonies and those belonging to foreign groups and trading companies. No matter where they hailed from and who they were working for, each and any of them conducted business with the Friday men, which meant they were fair game in the eyes of the Hexers. The scale of destruction that the Hexers had wrought so far was already painful enough to set back the development of the colony by a year or more. Not only did a lot of trade vessels carrying invaluable materials and industrial equipment fall at the hands of the warp ravagers, the Gaugers also lost a lot of outlying infrastructure throughout the star system. Mining bases, ore processing facilities, and most importantly the large gas processing plant at Pima Prime Roman 9C turned into molten and shattered ruins after enduring sustained bombardments from aggressive Hexer detachments. Due to Governor Mabrius Gage's quick decision to give up all pretense of defending these assets, the Hexers met with virtually no opposition aside from coming across the occasional space mines and automated defense turrets. Both sides knew that the real battle would not start until they met at the orbit of Pima Prime V. As the distance between the invading fleet and the principal trading hub in the port system continued to diminish, the prospect of a collision became more and more certain. There are only 12 hours left until we begin the assault on Pima Prime VA. General Verl's projection reported to Vess. We will face much heavier opposition once we commence this critical attack. Although we do not expect to fail in our attempt to break open the moon complex and destroy all of the shipbuilding facilities that the Gage dynasty has built up at great cost, the sundered phalanx's ranged units will probably pelt us with long-ranged attacks. We can't afford to take a break under those circumstances. Considering how little time we have to complete this operation, we must immediately proceed with the main assault on the Cossack Ring. Read novel Fulmy. Vess grimaced as he paced around in his private office. His upgraded, unending regalia hardly gave him any sense of security when he thought about coming face to face with well over 100,000 enemy mechs, including a score of high-ranking mechs. The scale of this battle was unimaginable. While he had decided to take part in this operation in order to give his Larkinsons valuable experience in fighting under these circumstances, a part of him still questioned the wisdom of taking part in an enormous grudge match. The hatred between the Friday men and the Hexers ran so deep that getting involved would most certainly increase his infamy among the former. However, as long as the Golden Skull Alliance helped the Hexers vanquish the opposition, the reputation and prestige that he and his allies would obtain from this action was of incalculable value. While a lot of people in the Red Ocean had difficulty appreciating the effort required to defeat alien forces, it was a lot more obvious how much strength it took to successfully assault a well-defended core colony that had been built up with the support of one of the leading powers of a second-rate state. Then there were the other possible rewards he could obtain from succeeding in this venture. Just thinking about the huge amount of loot that was still stuck on a planet that was almost just as developed as Davut already started to make his mouth water. Thinking about all of these reasons allowed Vess regained his determination to proceed with this risky offensive. I recognize that there will be a hard fight ahead of us, but Task Force Fury will be doing most of the heavy lifting this time, right? That is correct, sir. General Verl briefly smiled. According to our current plans, the Mech divisions of the Hex army shall act as the anvil, while we shall function as the hammer. This means that the Hexer Mech units will move forward first and attract as much firepower from the Sundered Phalanx as they can. This will grant us the initiative to move and attack the Sundered Phalanx on our terms. In other words, the Hex army essentially agreed to act as the closest thing to cannon fodder for this upcoming confrontation. Vess couldn't imagine the losses that Task Force Fury would suffer as a result. The Golden Skull Alliance, on the other hand, could huddle its expeditionary fleet safely in the rear and dispatch its Mech forces under favorable circumstances while enjoying the cover of the brave Hexer Mech units. How luxurious. It's nice not to be the main target of the opposition for once. General Verl adopted a disapproving gesture. Don't take our role lightly. The reason why the Hexers agreed to give us space is because they have handed over the responsibility for cutting through the sharpest knives of the Sundered Phalanx to us. We must defeat the strongest Frydaemon assets, and that fight alone will cost us plenty of mechs and lives. Furthermore, we must also confront their stronger and more potent expert mechs. It is already a given that we will suffer losses among our own expert mechs. That was a heavy realization, and one that did not sit entirely well with Vess. No matter how much he had strengthened his expert mechs, and no matter what advantages they possessed against the opposition, a battle of this scope always produced casualties. Vess didn't actually mind too much if the Sundered Phalanx wrecked his expert mechs. They could always be rebuilt or replaced with enough time. It was a lot harder to replace expert pilots, particularly if they had grown a considerable amount. While Vess had invested a lot of funding into strengthening the cockpits of all of his expert mechs, who knew how well they would be able to withstand withering fire from the Sundered Phalanx. We need to be ready to rescue our expert pilots whenever possible, Vess instructed General Verl. Each pilot is an indispensable asset. Make sure to station plenty of regular troops in their vicinity if possible, and task them with rescuing our expert pilots if they have become vulnerable all of a sudden. That will cost us, sir. I would rather lose the lives of 100 ordinary Mech pilots than lose a single ready-made expert pilot. Understood. I will pass on the necessary orders. Though General Verl did not like this instruction, he understood what Vess was getting at. The Larkinson clan had built up a considerable reserve of ordinary Mech pilots and could always hire thousands more from Davut's expanding job market. In other words, each of the ordinary pilots in the service of the Larkinson army were expendable assets. I mean it, Verl. Don't take any half measures. I will allow our expert pilots to be defeated in battle, but under no circumstances should they be killed entirely. Their ejected cockpits must be preserved at all costs until we can bring them back to our fleet. If we lose too many expert pilots, then it is highly doubtful whether we can proceed with the Trailblazer expedition. I did not spend so many years on preparing for this massive venture only to cancel my plans before I ever got started. After making it abundantly clear that Vess wanted his expert pilots to be preserved as much as possible, the discussion soon turned into another direction. How have the rest of the Friday colonies reacted to this invasion? Vess asked. Most of the forces stationed in the other colonies have stayed put for the most part, General Verl replied. Surprisingly enough, the forces hailing from the Carnegie Group, the Vermeer Group, the Vanguard Group, and the Puffer clan have not even put up a pretense of moving to reinforce Pima Prime. They have stalled long enough that even if they depart now, they will arrive well after the dust has settled. It looks like the animosity between the Gage dynasty and the weaker coalition partners has deteriorated more than we anticipated. Vess smirked. Well, it is good to hear that Tristan's secret backers are at least upholding their end of the deal. You are still forgetting another coalition partner, sir. Unlike the aforementioned groups, the Khonsu clan is the only ally of the Gage dynasty that has dispatched reinforcements to Pima Prime. They are already on their way and should arrive at the edge of the star system soon enough. Combined with the reinforcements sent by the other Gauger colonies, we estimate that around 30,000 to 40,000 Mechs more enemies will enter this star system soon enough. That's all. That is only the first wave, sir. The more time passes by, the more reinforcements arrive from more parts of the Friday colonies. Depending on how much damage we sustain and how much munitions we will deplete in the upcoming assault, the fresh troops that have arrived from elsewhere can pose a considerable threat against us. At the very least, they may be able to delay and frustrate our attempts at escaping from the star system, thereby buying time for a proper counterattack. Vess frowned. Damn Consus, can't they mind their own business? The Consus have always been close to the Gaugers, according to the intelligence I've read. It is not a surprise that their interests are so intertwined with that of their allies that they have readily chosen to dispatch a couple of Mech divisions to Pima Prime. It was not difficult for Vess to understand the motives behind this move. Perhaps the Consus aren't so eager to confront us in battle, but they don't have to go this far. Even if their troops end up doing nothing, the Consus will still be able to prove their sincerity to the Gaugers. Of course, if we sustain so much damage from the ensuing fighting that we have become easy pickings, the Oni Guard won't be able to resist the urge to pick up a bargain. All of this meant that the intruding forces needed to hurry up and finish their business as quickly as possible. The discussion ended shortly afterwards. Vess left General Verl to prepare the Larkinson army for the imminent battle and checked up on the other parts of the clan. Surprisingly, not everyone in the clan felt comfortable with what they were doing. Ships like the Spirit of Bentheim, the Descentibus, the Vivacious Wal, and the Dragon's Den had no business wandering into an active battlefield. Even if the Larkinson clan had bolstered all of their defenses and added extra bunkers to their hulls, their ability to resist withering fire still fell far behind dedicated fleet carriers, such as the Wild Torch and the Gorgonean. We have buttoned down our ships as best as we can, Chief Minister Abigail Evern reported to Vess. The formation that we will assume will also prioritize their protection. No matter what frontal angle the sundered phalanx tries to shoot at us, our defensive vessels and combat carriers will always be in the way to absorb enemy fire first. The consequence of this decision is that we will suffer increased losses to our combat carriers. Vess sighed. This was a difficult trade-off to make. I understand. Try your best to spread out the damage as much as possible. I don't mind if our non-combat vessels absorb a bit of damage. They are all covered by ship-grade shield generators, and their hulls should have been reinforced as well. It's not a big deal if parts of their outer compartments get breached either. Just make sure that the Friday men will not be able to inflict so much damage that our capital ships will become crippled or destroyed in their entirety. The Larkinson Navy will do what it can, but what you are suggesting is no different from playing with fire. Depending on how much the Friday men hate us, we may become the target of a desperate revenge action. Then coordinate with the Hex Army. They have a lot of starships as well. I hope we will be able to enjoy their cover as well if we need the support. As the range between the invaders and Pima Prime grew closer, various people made their final resolutions before they were ready to sortie into battle. Venerable Brutus Wadden's expression turned gentle and affectionate as he bent down to pat the heads of his two lovely children. Both of them wore protective hazard suits that were especially sized for small children. "Daddy, I don't want you to go." Wexel Wadden Larkinson rubbed his eyes and cried. "Why can't you stay with us? Why can't Mommy stay as well?" Brutus bled his heart out when he heard, and sensed the fear emanating from his son. I cannot accompany you because I am a soldier and a protector. In times like these, I must do my duty and fight so that you will remain safe. I am doing this for both of you, my children. When you grow older, you will understand." "Mama," Tarina Wadden Larkinson ran up to her mother's suited legs and clung as tight as she could. "I don't want you to go either." Legion Commander Sendra Larkinson's firm heart melted for a moment as her motherly instincts overpowered her sword-maiden tendencies. The woman bent down and lifted her baby daughter in her arms. The little designer baby soon settled down as she enjoyed the warm embrace of her mother. Sendra kissed Tarina's head numerous times. "Read novel for me. Your mama has a duty as well, my cute princess. My fellow sword maidens and Larkinsons need me on the battlefield. Don't worry, though, you will still be among family. As long as you hop into this shuttle, you will be brought over to the Spirit of Bentheim, where your Auntie Gloriana and your cousins will keep you all company. They are all family, so they will take good care of you. If anything happens to us, then Gloriana will be your new mother." "I don't want another mama. I want you. You must stay." Both Brutus and Sendra exchanged helpless looks with each other. One of the benefits of raising designer babies was that they became smart really quickly. They also learned how to use the toilet and other basic necessities much earlier than normal. The downside was that their accelerated mental development allowed them to understand all kinds of complicated adult stuff, like death and loss, far in advance. Venerable Brutus and Commander Sendra weren't the only parents who had to conduct a difficult talk with their children before they boarded their respective mechs. Other couples such as Director Rania Wadden and Venerable Tusa Billingsley Larkinson also had to tell their children that it was necessary for mommy or daddy to fight on the front lines of a massive battle. This was the downside to promoting family and childbirth throughout the Larkinson clan. A lot of young couples had tied the knot during the 5-year break at Davute. Many of them also did not take much time to have children. Now, thousands of young boys and girls burst out into tears as they had to wave their mother and fathers off to battle. Elsewhere in the fleet, Venerable Joshua Larkinson shared a soft and intimate kiss with Caddies. Once the expert pilot was done with expressing his affection for his wife, he smiled and bent down to kiss the head of the young baby that was cradled in her mother's arms. "I love you so much, Mayra." His second offspring giggled and happily reached out to pat her father's cheeks. Joshua looked down and patted his son on the head and shoulder. "You stay with your mother, okay? You're the man of the family while I am gone. Just do your best to keep little Mayra company. You're a Larkinson. You're not too young to start doing your duty." The little black-haired kid looked cute as he attempted a salute. "I won't let anything happen to Mommy and my little sis." Caddies chuckled in mirth. "Calm down, Kyrian. Your mother can take care of herself in a fight. I will demolish anyone who even thinks of touching your hair." Her concerns were as clear as day, though. She briefly glanced back at her floating bloodsinger and felt more helpless than ever. "This is not your battle, honey," Venerable Joshua softly said, even as his determination to fight and win grew stronger. "Let me take care of it all. I have your heart sword by my Evertshanger's side. That is all of the support that I need from you. I'm also not deploying into battle with the base form of my expert mech. After such a long time, I finally have the honor of deploying into battle with my first mountain wargear." Caddies perked up all of a sudden. "I never imagined I would feel so grateful that Vess has spent so much time and attention on designing those oversized equipment loadouts. Which one will you make use of first?" "Definitely the City Breaker," the expert pilot answered. "The initial battle will start at extreme range. This is a good opportunity for me and every other ranged mech to bombard any target we can hit at extreme range. Hopefully, we'll be able to overwhelm a Titan shield and knock out at least one of the defensive space stations orbiting around Pima Prime V before the next phase of the battle commences." The early phase of the battle was not decisive for the attackers. The Sundered Phalanx possessed a distinctive advantage in ranged combat due to its emphasis on fighting against living mechs, outside of the range of any hostile glows if possible. Combined with all of the defensive installations of the Cossack Ring, it was highly likely that Task Force Fury, as well as the Golden Skull Alliance, would be suffering greater losses than the enemy. It was crucially important for the attackers to get as close as possible, so that all of their melee mechs would finally be able to exchange blows with their enemy counterparts. "What then?" Kedis asked. "I'll probably change to the Titan 5 loadout next," Joshua answered. "The Patriarch has always been eager to see how it performs in a real battle against a real opponent. The meat suit is also well-equipped to fight against large numbers of weaker opponents, though I'm sure that whoever is responsible for it will complain about all of the biomass that I will use up during the fighting." "That's no big deal. Biomass can always be regrown. Will you switch to another loadout after that?" "It depends, Kedis. The battle will probably be in its hottest phase at this stage. All of this mounted wargear is great against large forces, but they are not flexible and agile enough for me to duel against the enemy's melee expert mechs. The Sundered Phalanx will most definitely recognize the threat my Everett Shanger poses to them if I am allowed to do what I want. Commander Kaysela Ingvar even told me that I will probably be so high-profile on the battlefield that the Friday men will dispatch a powerhouse of their own to stop me from wrecking their rank-and-file units." "Joshua." "Don't worry, honey. I got this," Joshua confidently stated as he quickly embraced his wife once again. "This is all part of a plan. I'm never alone. If the Sundered Phalanx truly dares to send one of its high-tier expert mechs to me, I will have backup by my side to contain or destroy the threat." As Joshua tried to reassure Kedis that he was not going in half-cocked, his son Kyrian called for attention again. "Will you beat a lot of bad guys, Daddy?" The father of the family smiled indulgently at his kid. "Daddy will most certainly do whatever is necessary to keep us all alive. I will defeat as many enemies as I must, but personally I hope that most of them will see sense and retreat. I don't want to spill more blood than is necessary." Kedis scoffed a bit. "I don't see your wish coming true." "I can still hope." Elsewhere, two siblings stood before their respective expert mechs. Of the two suited expert pilots, one of them looked at the newly arrived mech designer in incomprehension. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need another weapon," Venerable Iman Ingvar politely said. "Besides, what can a little pistol do? I'm not opposed to carrying an extra gun, but it has to be powerful enough to be worth the trouble." "Don't be fooled by its size. It's much more powerful than it looks," Gloriana told him. "It carries a brand new crystal type that should pack a lot of punch against certain kinds of opposition. Who knows? It might even be useful against the Tensars that you are meant to face. Against opponents as strong as the Arma Tensar and the Fila Tensar, it is best to have more options available. Don't you want to protect your sister from harm? As a rare command-oriented expert pilot, I can guarantee you that the Sundered Phalanx will treat her as a priority target." "I will take the gun." "Good. It will be mounted onto your mech in a minute. Make sure to read the manual." Gloriana passed on a number of tips and instructions before she left the two Ingvars alone. "You heard what Gloriana said. The enemy will be aiming at you," Iman said in obvious concern. Commander Kaysela did not look impressed, though. "I'm hardly alone, brother. I will be surrounded by a lot of living sentinels and other Larkinson mechs. Before an enemy is able to reach me, they will have to get through all of our other units. The Sundered Phalanx have plenty of elite strike units and powerful expert mechs as well. I'm a priority target no matter what enemy we face. As long as the enemy discovers that I'm a force multiplier, I will be fighting with a target behind my back." As the Ingvar's siblings came to terms with this, Ves became preoccupied with settling his own children. He initially planned to stow them in his grand stateroom, but given their important roles in the future, he came up with an even better idea. Why not keep them by his side and allow them to witness at least a part of the fighting process? Hardly any kid could boast of sitting in the front seats of a massive offensive action. The bridge of the spirit of Bentheim became a lot noisier as the patriarch invited his 3 kids to where he would be performing his duties for the foreseeable time. "Fight, fight, fight," Andrest excitedly yelled. Aurelia frowned and shook her sister's body. "Sister, be quiet. You're embarrassing yourself." "Hey, you're not the boss of me, big sis. I can yell whatever I want." As the 2 girls started to argue against each other again, Marvane sat quietly on top of Vess' armored lap. Marvane looked extremely fascinated as he traced his covered fingers over the tough, metallic exterior of the unending regalia. "So cool. Can you give me my own armor as well, Papa?" "Ha ha ha," Vess laughed as he approved of Marvane's curiosity. "Maybe one day you will. Preferably, I would like you to build your own suit. There is nothing better than designing and making your own armored suit with your own hands." "Huh, make my own suit." "Yes, you have the talent for this. You're my son, Marvane. As long as you want to learn my craft, I will always be available to teach you the tricks of my trade. Let alone an armored suit like my unending regalia, I can easily teach you to design cool and awesome mechs like the Transcendent Punisher and the Stingripper. What is your favorite expert mech?" The Evertshanger," Marvane enthusiastically replied. "You have good taste. That happens to be my favorite expert mech as well." Vess proudly smiled. "What if I tell you that you will be able to design your own expert mech like the Evertshanger one day? Not an exact copy of the Evertshanger, of course, but as long as you become good enough, you will easily be able to design a mech that is just full of life." "I want it. Teach me, Papa." "I would love to teach you how to design mechs. For now, just sit back and watch the battle unfold. We mech designers live for this. Make sure you pay extra attention to our expert mechs. They're my best works." "Okay, Papa Tilda." Pima Prime Via came under assault. Normally, nothing much happened at the first moon that orbited the most important planet in the star system. Unlike Pima Prime VB that operated as a stopover point and a logistical hub, the first moon was supposed to function as a defensive bulwark. The Gage dynasty drafted grand plans that sought to turn Pima Prime Via into the main headquarters of the sundered phalanx in the entire Friday colonies. By turning large parts of its surface as well as its underground terrain into military facilities, the moon was meant to become so formidable that its mere existence would deter many attackers from launching an attack on Pima Prime. However, the amount of funding required to transform the moon to this extent was astronomical. The amount of resources and industrial capacity needed to build up all of those military-grade defenses and constructs simply weren't present. The Gage dynasty was already preoccupied with absorbing the large chunks of territory it had conquered from the former Hexadric hegemony. The Gaugers also had to rebuild their military and reinforcements in their home state in order to deter other parties from taking advantage of their weakened conditions. Considering that the Gaugers had already stationed 14 veteran mech divisions and 1 powerful ace pilot in the port system, none of the Friday men thought that there would be any rush to bolster Pima Prime's defenses any further. This was why the grand construction process, centered around Pima Prime Via, was not scheduled to be finished until 30 years later. It appeared that the Gage dynasty had gravely underestimated the threat level of the Red Ocean. Read novel Fulmi. Though the Magyar Middle Zone did indeed suffer a lot less alien incursions in the past few years, the amount of human-to-human conflicts increased dramatically. Now, the Gaugers suffered from their grave miscalculation as their powerful military base on Pima Prime Via came under heavy bombardment. The invasion fleet, which was still barreling towards the main planet, had opened fire as soon as they reached extreme range. The ironically named Crosshair base fell into the targeting sights of tens of thousands of heavy artillery mechs, cannoneer mechs, and even rifleman mechs. With so much firepower bearing down onto the stationary fortress, its formidable Titan shield immediately endured an enormous battering. In comparison, the defensive turrets sheltering underneath the powerful energy shield made a courageous but lackluster attempt to exact a price from the attackers. The massive fleet easily dealt with the attacks. Many different carrier vessels absorbed the incoming attacks with the help of their ship-grade shield generators before retreating behind the hulls of other ships when their shield capacities began to reach their limits. This way, the fleet effectively suffered no material damage. The long-ranged fire from the artillery mechs, stationed all the way at the Cossack ring, were able to inflict more damage due to their greater volume of fire. However, the enormous range made it too impractical to fire physical weapons, so the sundered phalanx mech units and the stationary turrets of the Cossack ring mostly limited their output to laser beam attacks. By leveraging the advantages of the fastest and most precise attack method in their arsenal, the defenders were able to concentrate their attacks on specific starships and put a lot of pressure on them, overwhelming their shield generators and inflicting serious damage to their hulls before they could take shelter behind other friendly ships. Even so, many long-ranged attacks missed more often than not due to a combination of heavy ECM and other clever measures. General Aliski Victrix didn't even bat an eye as she observed the stricken ships on the large battle map projection in the middle of the command center. One of them received such a great blast that the combat carrier lost power and drifted out of formation. Have her mechs deployed already? Everything aside from her bunker mechs, ma'am. Pull them out as well. Carve them out of their bunkers if you will have to. We need their firepower for the engagement to come. Though Task Force Fury was already beginning to suffer its first real casualties, the thick and powerful Titan shield surrounding Crosshair Base was destabilizing by the minute. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Crosshair Base was just the first phase of a larger fortification project. In addition to that, tens of thousands of mechs should have been stationed in and around the defensive works. If Pima Prime Via had become the defensive bulwark envisioned by the Gage dynasty, then not even a massive mech army numbering over 1 million mechs would have been able to overpower it with ease. As it was, all of the money and resources spent on building up the initial base pretty much went down the drain. The expensive strategic Titan shield generator that was buried deep underneath the moon's surface began to whine and overheat, much to the consternation of the few patriotic engineers that had volunteered to man their stations to the bitter end. We can't hold it much longer. We've pulled out every trick in the box that we can come up with, but we've squeezed the last bit of potential out of this damn Titan shield generator. There's nothing left to give. If the dynamic rings don't blow apart from the stress, then the internal structure will begin to melt from the excessive heat buildup. It would be a miracle if it lasts 5 more minutes. Then we will do our best to last 5 minutes. The more time we buy for the rest of our boys, the more we tire out the hexers in advance. Every second counts. Despite the best efforts of the sacrificial engineers, the enormous Titan shield generator finally shut down and became inoperable just 2 minutes later. Nulo. Even though the shield generator didn't blow up and merely radiated a lot of heat in the enormous chamber, the engineers all knelt in despair as their primary defensive measure finally failed. It's over. Task Force Fury immediately noticed the changes. The Hexer-ranged mechs quickly tightened their aim and specifically targeted the exposed turrets and other critical defensive modules. Crosshair Base quickly lost all of its teeth, as its fortifications simply weren't up to the task of resisting the incoming attacks without the cover of a Titan shield. Once it no longer posed a significant threat against the invading forces. General Aliski Victrix diverted a couple of demolition-oriented mech companies to finish the job and more importantly wreck the 24 underground shipyards that previously produced a lot of combat carriers and other important starships for the Gage dynasty. All of the hulls under construction soon broke apart after suffering sustained bombardment. The intruding Hexer mechs then proceeded to blast all of the construction equipment and other production machines without mercy. Though the Friday men could technically come back and salvage the remains to rebuild a lot of machinery, there was a lot of high-quality precision equipment that could not be easily made in the frontier. The Gage dynasty either had to make them back in their home star sector and ship them over to the Red Ocean at a huge cost and delay, or exchange valuable MTA credits to obtain ready-made goods. Neither of these options were cost-effective. Despite the heavy losses suffered at Pima Prime VA, Governor Mabrius Gage and the rest of his leadership council did not flinch at the downfall of Crosshair Base and the Moonside shipyards. The real prizes of the port system was concentrated on the surface and just below the ground of Pima Prime V. The system governor had a duty to defend the critical industries and infrastructure of the developing planet. "This is where they stop," he declared as he put on his most resplendent uniform and personally supervised the defense effort from the Palace of New Beginnings. "We have beaten the Hexers once. We can beat them again. We have taken the measure of their firepower during their assault on an unimportant moon base. However many guns they brought to this fight, we have more. With the Cossack ring backing us all up, we can shred their Mechs apart long before they close the distance." This was the greatest reliance of the Sundered Phalanx. Task Force Fury may look overwhelming, but a substantial amount of Hexer Mechs were primarily melee Mechs that excelled at close-ranged battles. Unfortunately, the ferocity and hatred that the Hexers channeled towards the Friday men did not translate well in ranged combat. Calm, precision, and rationality often served Mech pilots better when they needed to fight against opponents at a distance. Once Pima Prime Via got demolished, the attack fleet proceeded onwards while splitting off a section of its ships. Numerous vessels landed on the surface of the moon that was located on its dark side, which faced away from the planet it orbited. These ships consisted of logistical vessels, cargo vessels reserved for carrying a lot of plunder, and combat carriers that were loaded with land-bound Mechs and other specialized solutions for the anticipated planetary assault. The Golden Skull Alliance also left behind a substantial portion of its fleet. Ships such as the Descentibus, the Diligent Ovenbird, the Dragon's Den, the Vivacious Wal, and many smaller support vessels used the moon as a shield to protect them against bombardment from the main defensive units of the Sundered Phalanx. The Hexers and Golden Scullers also left behind a reserve consisting of thousands alert spaceborne Mech units. These units were assigned to guard the rear until they were needed at the front lines. Now that the attack fleet had temporarily stashed away its more burdensome elements, the rest of the starships and Mechs continued to barrel forward in order to close the distance as quickly as possible. Even though both Task Force Fury and the Larkinson clan possessed ships and Mechs that possessed warp travel capabilities, none of them dared speed up at this time. The expensive assets would just get isolated and picked off with ease if they jumped ahead. Instead, the predominantly Hexer line advanced at a steady, uniform pace. As many of the leading ships endured hundreds, if not thousands, of laser beam strikes, the vessels frequently turned and rotated their hulls in order to spread the damage across multiple directional energy shields and hull sections. So what if they have a lot of guns? They're all shooting from the front. Our ships just have to roll over and the Friday men have to start all over again. A single combat carrier could easily endure up to 100 times as many attacks if the ship was able to disperse all of the incoming attacks over her entire surface area. The Sundered Phalanx Mech pilots tried to counteract this by concentrating their fire and timing their attacks to inflict huge bursts of damage in the smallest possible time interval. The experienced and well-trained Friday men Mech pilots were all proficient in this. Their professional coordination, along with abundant support from the rear, allowed them to maximize their firepower as best as possible. The real fight hadn't even begun, and already Task Force Fury was losing combat carriers left and right at an increasingly faster pace than before. Even then, General Aliski Victrix did not show any reaction. The Mother's Wrath, along with many other ships, continued to move past the disabled and derelict carriers in grim determination. If they are shooting our carriers, they're not shooting down our mechs, the female leader remarked with a smirk. Let them fire at our ships. We will win as long as we retain enough combat-capable mechs at the end. Compared to the Hexers, who were losing a substantial amount of hardware from long-ranged bombardment, the Sundered Phalanx was in a much better position. Many of its mechs were hiding behind the defensive platforms or within the protective envelopes of the military space stations that comprised the Cosmic Ring. Each space station was protected by a Titan shield that was not much weaker than the one that protected Crosshair Base, which meant that they mitigated an enormous amount of damage. This meant that aside from the occasional accident, the main mech divisions of the Sundered Phalanx had suffered no substantial losses up to this point. These Friday men are turtling behind their defenses. Then let us tear down their walls. No defense lasts forever. Though the shooting had begun over an hour ago, the intensity of the battle was not too great. Not a lot of mechs were capable of dealing effective damage at longer ranges, and it was not that difficult to manage the incoming damage. Ranged expert mechs, such as the Amaranto, hadn't even been put into play as of yet. Their firepower needed to be reserved against the greater threats of the Friday Coalition. For now, the fight was predominantly fought by the lesser units of the two sides. The individual losses did not even register to the officers anymore, as all of them understood that it was a numbers game. Whoever ran out of mechs and lost all combat effectiveness first would lose this crucial engagement. It took a lot of time to get to that point. The Friday men and the Hexers were well versed with long campaigns that stretched across weeks or months of constant fighting. The exchange of fire slowly intensified as more and more weapons became effective at different ranges. Mech such as the Larkinson clan's Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II and Eternal Redemption Mark Roman II started to bring their formidable Gauss cannons to bear. Vess paid a lot of attention to the latest edition of the Transcendent Punisher. The Ilvanane Mech pilots did not activate the signature ability of their iconic Mech model. They did not need to do so when they were mostly aiming their firepower at the stationary defensive fortifications of the Cosmic Ring. Read novel Fulmy. At his side, Shannon Maris tried her best to prevent his kids from running around the bridge of the Spirit of Bentheim and distracting the crew from performing their vital duties. Pew, pew, pew. Andrast excitedly lifted a Mech figurine of the Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II and pretended that its heavy cannons were firing beams and projectiles at the Sundered Phalanx. Boom! You're dead. It actually took quite a bit of strength for Andrast to lift her toy. Since it was based on a heavy mech, it was larger and heavier than the other mech figurines that Vess had made for his daughter. The energetic girl continued to play with her mech figurine until a larger pair of hands plucked the toy from her grasp. Now, what did we tell you about shouting and yelling in the workplace, young lady? The red-headed girl jumped and tried to take back her toy, but her nanny kept it well out of her reach. Give it back. I won't give it back until you calm down and learn your lesson. You need a reminder on how to behave. This is a serious situation, young lady. Further back, the oldest of the three children had become a lot more somber about what was happening. Meow. Meow. Aurelia tried her best to look composed and in control while she remained seated on her child-sized chair. She gazed at the central projections with some concern. Lucky and Clixie had draped themselves over the armrests of the small chair and offered up their backs for pets and hugs. How many people will get hurt, you think? The eldest girl asked as she scratched Clixie's chin. Meow meow. My uncles and aunties have talked much about the battles our clan has fought. I never knew they could be so scary. Is this what everyone used to feel? Meow meow meow. I will make sure our clan will never feel this way then, Aurelia quietly vowed. Vess, on the other hand, continued to educate his youngest son about Mech design. Though any other child shouldn't have been able to understand anything about Mechs, let alone figure out 2 plus 2, Ves did not underestimate the intellect of his latest child. In any case, even if Marvane barely understood anything about Mechs, it was fun to talk about them anyway. Many children developed a fascination towards Mechs, and Ves wanted to make sure his son was not an exception. "What does Mark Roman II stand for, Papa?" Marvane asked as he continued to sit on Ves' armored lap. "Does it mean the Mech is named after Mark?" Ves chuckled. "No, my son. Mark can be a name, but it can also have a different meaning. When it comes to Mechs and other technological products, Mark usually stands for the version of a particular model. Sometimes people use version or variant, but it all comes down to the same meaning. Whatever product has a higher mark is the newer version of the same machine. So this is not your Transcendent Punisher Mech." "Yup. Our clan used to field an older version, but its firepower was too weak, and its defenses weren't sturdy enough to keep up with the battles in the Red Ocean." "What did you change, Papa?" "Many things," Ves replied as he called up a projection that showed the simplified design schematics of the first and second versions of the Transcendent Punishers. "Look at these 2 designs. What stands out to you first?" "The outside looks the same, but the inside looks different." "That's right. What an astute observation. The exterior looks the same because this is the look of a Transcendent Punisher. It is supposed to look big, heavy, imposing, but also righteous and sacred. That is why it has a bright coating. It makes its pilots feel good. I already like how it looked in the original version, and didn't change anything about the exterior in the second version." Marvane paid more attention to the differences in the internal design of the 2 versions of the same model. The changes that the Larkinson clan had made were drastic. It was not a mistake to say that Ves and his design team had practically reinvented the Transcendent Punisher model. "The guns are all different," the boy pointed out. "Their shapes are different." "That's right. I've replaced the old set of guns with completely different models that are better in many ways. Take the main source of energy damage output, for example. The first version of the Mech that I designed many years ago only came with a pair of relatively ordinary positron beam cannons. There's nothing wrong with them, but our clan can do much better these days. I've designed a brand new Luminar crystal cannon model that is based on my more recent advancements in Luminar crystal technology." Marvane looked confused as he compared the 2 designs. Why is this cannon stronger when it looks simpler?" Ves chuckled again. "Who told you that more complicated Mechs are stronger?" "Mama." "Well, Mama is wrong. My new Luminar crystal cannons are based on alien technology, who just happens to be better at developing energy weapons than humans. By borrowing the technological principles of the Luminar race, I've developed these powerful cannons that are currently pounding the defenses of the Friday Men with great power. Look at this graph, for example. This shows the estimated damage output of different ranged Mechs. Our Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II are easily out-damaging the models of the Hex Army. Our allies have a lot more heavy artillery Mechs than us, but the quality and production cost of our Ilvanen machines are much higher." Ves did not skimp on much when he led the upgrade project for the Transcendent Punisher line. Ranged combat was the name of the game in the new frontier. A Mech force had no capital to roam the Red Ocean and fight against aliens without bigger and more powerful guns. "Do you know how much stronger my exclusive Luminar crystal cannons have become compared to the old pair of positron cannons?" "How much?" 60%. Marvane's eyes grew wide. "Oh. Do you remember what I taught about percentages? You divide something by 100 and multiply by the number." "That's correct. So what does it mean if a weapon is 60% stronger?" "It takes much less time to kill an enemy." "That is also correct." Ves grinned. "This is exactly why I invested so much money and effort into equipping the Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II with my latest model of Luminar crystal cannons. Not only has its versatility increased enormously by granting it the option of firing multiple different beam types, but it is also far more efficient and far more powerful due to all of the new tech. By eliminating enemies faster, our opposition will have less mechs left to destroy our own stuff, allowing us to destroy their remaining mechs with greater ease. This will produce a snowball effect that will eventually result in massive victories. Are we winning now, Papa? Vess' expression turned a bit awkward. Not exactly. The current battle is still in its early stages. While our new artillery mechs are undoubtedly the strongest, we haven't brought enough of them to make a bigger difference in this artillery duel. If Task Force Fury replaced all of its Hexer-developed artillery mechs with Transcendent Punishers, then Vess undoubtedly believed that they would be able to achieve a bigger advantage at this stage of the battle. Unfortunately, the Hex army could not afford to invest so much money in the development and production of its artillery mechs. Though it pared back the amount of mech models it actively used, there were still hundreds of different mechs that each needed to be produced in different quantities in order to protect the Hex Federation. Even though Vess looked down on the more economical artillery mech models employed by the Hexers, he could not ignore the sheer amount of firepower they wielded at the moment. What about these other guns, Papa? Why don't they look so different? Ah, those are Gauss cannons. I told you once before how they worked. Do you still remember what I said? Marvane briefly paused and recalled the words from his prodigious memory. You wrap a lot of coils around a barrel and run electric current through it to generate a force that can push a metal slug really fast. Exactly, that's my little genius. Good boy. The 100,000 MTA credits that he had paid Witshaw and Seneca to develop Marvane's genes were not in vain. Vess didn't have the slightest clue what kind of weird alien or artificial genes they blended into Marvane's DNA, but the results so far made him extremely satisfied. It was a blessing to raise a born genius. Look closely at the coils in the diagrams, the dutiful father pointed out. They look a little different, don't they? His son nodded. The coils of the newer mech are thinner, smaller, and shorter than the older gun. Doesn't it mean that it is weaker? That is only the case when everything else is equal, Marvane. If the materials and overall design of the Gauss weapon system has remained constant, then making these coils smaller should have indeed lowered the weapon's performance. Now, what did I do to make this smaller Gauss cannon more powerful? You made it more expensive. Yup, don't underestimate these relatively fragile-looking coils. They're made of materials that are much tougher and can conduct electricity much more effectively without deforming or melting after a time. By applying this approach throughout the entire weapon system, I have made it a lot more powerful, but also a lot more efficient. It fires smaller projectiles, but because they fly out of the barrel a lot faster than before, its damage output is 40% greater than before. To be honest, Vess could have maintained the original size of the Gauss cannons of the Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II, but he felt it made the heavy artillery mech too unwieldy and less fault-tolerant. Since the guns were already powerful enough after incorporating high-quality materials and more advanced design elements, Vess had focused on making it more practical and enduring in longer engagements. As a result, even if the Transcendent Punisher fought for numerous hours at a time, it would still be able to fire Gauss rounds on a continuous basis, as long as it was supplied with enough energy cells and ammunition racks, both of which could easily be replenished inside bunkers. Vess became increasingly more impressed how a tiny kid like Marvane was already able to comprehend basic scientific theories. If not for the fact that Marvane was way too young and did not receive much lessons yet, he probably would have been able to start attending high school classes in advance. Though Vess looked forward to seeing his little genius son grow into an excellent mech designer, he also began to get a headache at the thought of whether there was any point in sending him to school in the first place. Marvane learned so damn quickly that it was difficult to imagine that any of his classmates could catch up to his demonic pace. Vess supposed that he and his wife could teach their child everything that he needed to know to get started. But that would deprive Marvane of a lot of valuable experiences that he could only gain from institutions. Perhaps he should look into sending him to an elite Mech design university. Given humanity's proclivity in developing artificial geniuses, there should definitely be specialized institutions that were geared towards teaching these extremely scary children. Vess could think about that later, though. For now, he wanted to keep Marvane by his side and indoctrinate his son with all of his original theories and ideals. Aside from the two main guns, the Mark I and Mark Roman II versions of the Transcendent Punisher differ in many other ways. Look at the armor system, for example. It has received an all-round enhancement. We have especially reinforced its frontal and upper armor. Do you know why? Because most attacks come from the front, Marvane answered. That's correct, but that doesn't explain why we thickened its upper armor as well. Can you figure out the reason behind this design choice? Read novel for me. Vess smiled. The Transcendent Punisher is a land-bound Mech model, son. While it is primarily designed to function as a bunker Mech, it is also capable of moving around and fighting on land. We even intend to land numerous Mech companies of Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II on the surface of Pima Prime V if we are able to win this battle. Do you understand now why it needs stronger upper armor? Marvane's eyes quickly shone in understanding. It's so that they can shoot down starships from the skies. Vess shook his head. That's not exactly right. While it is technically possible for the Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II to strike at starships in orbit, in truth it is not practical enough. Many energy beams will lose a lot of energy when passing through many kilometers of air. Physical projectiles such as Gauss rounds will not only have to fight against the local planet's gravity, but also endure a lot of air friction. By the time the Gauss rounds get high enough, an alert starship would have long been able to move out of the way. I don't understand, Papa. You don't need to understand right now. I will show you the modeling once you grow old enough to understand the math. As Vess continued to explain many other nuances about the Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II to a child that should have been more interested in playing with toy mechs like his sister Andrast, the battle continued to grow hotter and hotter. After the ranged mechs started to fire physical projectiles, the amount of damage that both sides endured became a lot greater. Many Hexers' ships continued to fall out of the battle line after suffering critical or crippling damage. While the Sundered Phalanx would have preferred to reduce the amount of enemy mechs that were able to enter into battle, the Hexers guarded them too well. It was almost impossible to snipe them all down at such a long distance, and when the majority were huddling carefully behind the massive hulls of their own motherships. Even so, the rate of combat carriers that the Hexers were losing was starting to become distressing. Perhaps it was still possible to perform emergency repairs on them to restore basic functionality, but each one that got knocked out meant that the Hexers wouldn't be able to return to friendly space with as many mechs as before. However, General Aliski Victrix did not pay attention to this cost. She had been charged by the Council of Matriarchs to achieve victory in the Pima Prime system at all costs. It was worth sacrificing so many ships if it meant that the Friday men lost a large chunk of their shipbuilding, mech production, and other important industrial capabilities. In any case, as long as the Hex Federation retained all of its own shipyards, the Hexers would definitely be able to rebuild all of the sacrificed combat carriers over time. It is not as if we need as much mech capacity once we are done in the star system, the harsh general sneered. Casualties were inevitable. In her opinion, any sacrifice was acceptable as long as her enemies suffered greater losses. Whatever people thought of her strategy, it was having the desired effect. The Hexers lost relatively few ranged mechs at this stage. Most of the Hexers' mechs that got knocked out of the battle so far mostly consisted of bunker mechs. They either got demolished after a succession of enemy attacks drilled through their layers of protection, or simply couldn't aim their weapons in the right direction anymore, as the ships they were stationed on went on a ballistic course after becoming inoperable. However, the Hexers managed to preserve most of their ranged combat power, much of which finally started to have an effect. Yes, we finally cracked one of their big shells. Destroy the space station. One of the military space stations finally lost its Titan shield after enduring a torrent of long-ranged attacks. Though it took a lot more volleys to destroy the physical structure of the thick and sturdy space station, its fall represented the first gap in the cosmic ring. As other space stations and smaller defensive platforms continued to endure greater pressure, the first expert mechs finally began to make an appearance. The most prominent expert mech that opened fire at this time was the Amaranto. Vess' eyes lit up as he could finally witness the results of his upgrade work on his proudest ranged expert mechs. Inside the cockpit of the Amaranto, Venerable Davia Stark grimaced a bit as she studied the long-ranged sensor readings supplied by the blinding Banshee and other powerful starships. Though the Amaranto version 2.0 featured a massive upgrade to her sensor and targeting systems, in situations like these, there was no need to rely on the small and limited modules of a mech. The sensor and targeting data collected and processed by massive starships backed with extremely powerful processor banks were much more accurate and reliable than anything an individual mech could obtain. As the expert rifleman mech huddled behind a protected firing position on the hull of the Gorgonaean, Venerable Stark eventually locked on to a distant expert mech that was moving rather exuberantly. Unlike most of other Fridayman expert mechs that were laying low or hiding their presences entirely, one of them behaved differently than normal. It was a hero expert mech. Davia did not need to access the info supplied by the command net to figure out the identity of the mech and pilot. Venerable Dirksen Tavorin of the 345th Kermorans, piloting a mid-tier expert hero mech called the Azure Vanquisher. There were plenty of public records about Venerable Tavorin, and the Hexers collected even more information about his career trajectory. The Kermorans was an old mech division, and one that enjoyed a proud and storied history. Venerable Dirksen Tavorin also performed well during the Komodo War, having fought toe-to-toe against his aggressive Hexer counterparts and rarely falling into a disadvantage. What was notable about Venerable Tavorin was that he stood out for his ability to rally and encourage his fellow mech pilots. He frequently led mechs into battle, bailed out friendlies that were about to get taken out by the enemy, and shouted constant encouragements over the communication channels. What the Azure Vanquisher was doing at the moment was undoubtedly a part of Venerable Tavorin's effort to keep up morale. Venerable Stark did not underestimate this clownish act. Hardly any Fridayman mech pilot would feel good at confronting a massive invasion force. The undaunted advance of Task Force Fury already brought a lot of bad memories of the booty battles of the past. In order to ensure that the defending troops fought with confidence and not with fear, Venerable Tavorin did his best to do his part and inspire the mech pilots around him to resist the invaders. "We have beaten them once. We can beat them again. What are you afraid of? As long as we hold the line, the Hexers will break in front of our defensive lines. These witches are all the same even after so many years have gone by. Their mechs look different, but as long as their heads are still filled with thoughts about mistreating boys, they won't know they have overreached until all of their mechs have broken apart." The obnoxious Azure expert mech kept flying across the length of the cosmic ring in order to inspire the troops along the way, not bothering too much about keeping its frame behind hard cover. To be fair, there was almost no way an enemy could land a precise shot on such a small and relatively agile target at this range. Even if a mech just happened to strike the Azure Vanquisher with skill or luck, Venerable Tavorin wasn't completely complacent. He had made sure to surround his expert hero mech with a resonance shield, which could resist nearly any initial strike. If Vess asked Commander Kaesela Ingvar, Venerable Brutus Wadden or Venerable Isabel Coton to assassinate this target under these circumstances. It was extremely unlikely for any of them to be able to complete their mission. They didn't excel at long-ranged precision. Their luminar crystal rifles also weren't powerful enough to overcome the Azure Vanquisher's defenses before the enemy expert Mech was able to hide behind the nearest space station, starship hull, or other solid object in the vicinity. Venerable Davia Stark did not have full confidence either, but out of every other expert pilot and expert Mech, the guest pilot and the Amaranto had the highest chance of success. Her mind and will grew more active as she resonated with her instrument of vengeance. Vess had personally redesigned the initial rifle of the Amaranto from the ground up. Though he wasn't able to increase its precision that much, he was easily capable of replacing older parts with more advanced parts that incorporated superior tech and materials. The Amaranto's maximum damage output had increased by 40% as a result, which was extremely impressive given the enormous diminishing returns at this level. The Amaranto already integrated a gem that boosted its firepower by 20% under all circumstances, so the damage output of the Larkinson clan's premier long-ranged precision solution had undergone a qualitative evolution. Now, Venerable Stark was betting that a full-powered shot from her upgraded Mech rifle was enough to destroy the Azure Vanquisher in a single hit. While her rifle steadily accumulated power, she remained still and focused on predicting Venerable Tavorin's erratic movement pattern. At a certain point, Venerable Stark instinctively pulled the trigger, causing her expert Mech to unleash such a thick and powerful resonance-empowered light beam attack that the surrounding space seemed to darken at its passage. A lot of people from both sides quickly spotted the powerful attack and immediately sought to determine the results of this intimidating strike. No, the Azure Vanquisher, it's broken. Though few people witnessed the strike when it happened, the extremely powerful light beam attack had soared incredibly quickly across space and managed to strike the Fridayman expert Mech right in the center. The Azure Vanquisher's resonance shield resisted the initial blow, but because Venerable Tavorin did not maintain it at full power in order to preserve his willpower reserves, the surprise attack overwhelmed this defensive measure in an instant. Fortunately for the expert hero Mech, the resonance shield still managed to negate a lot of power from the attack, causing the remaining incoming energy to strike the Azure Vanquisher's chest at reduced power. It just so happened that even the weakened attack was not easy to cope with for the expert hero Mech. The extremely potent long-ranged strike not only burned through the frontal armor of the enemy machine, but also seared through multiple important components and also threatened to breach the cockpit. While all of this took place, Venerable Tavorin's instincts only gave him a brief warning before his expert Mech already suffered damage. He barely had any time to make a response. A lesser Mech pilot would have frozen. Venerable Tavorin made the right choice in an instant. He transmitted the ejection command as fast as his thoughts could form. The Azure Vanquisher had already shot out its cockpit from its rear with powerful force before the Amaranto's light beam attack could finish the job. Though the Kermarans had not lost its expert pilot this time, the defenders had lost a crucial mid-range expert Mech before the champions from both sides had yet to start their struggle in earnest. It was a major setback for the sundered phalanx. What is this? How can a single attack be so powerful? Did their ace Mech break the rules? A lot more eyes focused on the Amaranto. Venerable Stark may have done her side a lot of good by removing an important enemy asset in advance, but she paid for it by attracting a lot of vigilance from the Fridaymen. For a moment, shock reigned throughout the battlefield. The intensity of the fighting hadn't abated, and many ranged Mech pilots continued to focus on pouring down fire at their respective targets. However, the Mech pilots who were idle enough to maintain an overview of the battle, as well as the officers who commanded the troops, all became astonished as they observed the results of the most powerful and accurate energy beam to have opened fire up to this point. Even before the empowered light beam attack struck the Azure Vanquisher, those who happened to catch a glance of this attack could instantly distinguish it from the many other laser and positron beams that filled up the space between the two sides. The diameter of the beam was simply too massive, and the energy readings produced by various sensors spiked so much that a lot of analytical systems couldn't make sense of the data anymore. Even so, any human that managed to observe the bright white beam surrounded by an angry red corona could instinctively feel an enormous sense of indignant power and righteous fury from the attack. Venerable Davia Stark's willpower directly pressed on the minds and spirits of each of these observers. By resonating with her instrument of vengeance, she had imbued its high-powered shot with her will and determination to kill. It was this desire to destroy and kill her chosen target that Venerable Dirksen Tavorin had to resist. If he was a little more alert and more focused on resisting his opponents, then perhaps his force of will would have been able to strengthen his Azure Vanquisher's ability to resist the incoming attack. Read novel Fulmi. Unfortunately, Venerable Tavorin had been too preoccupied with raising the morale of the troops of the Sundered Phalanx. As impressive as expert pilots could be, their concentration was still limited. The Fridayman expert pilot had become accustomed to viewing Hexers as rabid, but beaten dogs after beating so many of them during the Komodo War. It was a pity that his biases led him astray. The Hexer Mech pilots that survived until this day had all learned and evolved from that past conflict. They were just as ferocious as before, but they had grown smarter and figured out more ways to beat the Fridaymen. However, it wasn't the Hexers that pierced through the Azure Vanquisher's defenses and forced the desperate expert pilot to activate the eject command before he suffered the same fate as his battle partner. It was the Larkinson clan that destroyed him in the end. The intelligence briefings were wrong, Venerable Tavorin complained with a pained expression. They told me that the Larkinson clan's expert mechs had all received updates, but they never told me that the expert marksman mech gained this much power. The Fridaymen already possessed a certain understanding of the performance of the Larkinson clan's expert mechs. The Battle of Reckoning and the Battle of Fordilla Zentra both provided plenty of data to figure out a lot of properties of the notable expert mechs designed by Vess and his fellow designers. The mech designers and other analysts in the employ of the Gage dynasty even studied what little intelligence they could collect from the Larkinson army over the years, and roughly estimated the performance improvements of every expert mech. Venerable Tavorin and every other expert mech taking part in this fight had received plenty of briefings on the expert mechs that they would probably have to face. Yet despite being generous about all of the improvements the Larkinsons had applied to their older expert mechs, the Amaranto and its instrument of vengeance demonstrated a level of power that exceeded the upper boundaries of all of the estimates. At this time, his ejected cockpit took shelter behind a nearby squad of space knights, not that it brought the defeated expert pilot much comfort. An attack that was powerful enough to pierce through the Azure Vanquisher's resonance shield with surprising effectiveness and drill through its chest armor could also pierce through a bunch of ordinary space knights with ease. This is not the firepower that a normal expert mech should possess. His mind and will could still remember the magnitude of the attack that the Amaranto had launched in his direction. As the defeated expert pilot continued to revisit the moment when his expert mech got struck from afar, he eventually figured out the real reason why his expert mech got knocked down in a single blow. It's not just the mech that has become a lot stronger. That Larkinson expert pilot is also much more skilled than she has any right to be. How many powerful opponents did she fight in order to become so proficient at sniping? Her entire action sequence was flawless. No matter what, Venerable Dirksen Tavorin was still a competent expert pilot. If any other expert pilot sought to fell his Azure Vanquisher in a single blow, then his powerful intuition should have clued him in on the threat. This didn't happen. His instincts only screamed an alarm at him, when the Amaranto had already begun to discharge the powerful energies it accumulated in its luminar crystal rifle. That was way too late to make a proper response. As a hero Mech specialist, Venerable Tavorin was familiar with this skill, though he did not master it himself due to his different training priorities. To be able to target an enemy from long range and strike with precision was difficult, but not too troublesome to learn. To be able to do all that, while giving the enemy target no forewarning at all, was a lot more difficult to pull off. Not only did the expert pilot need to perform multiple different techniques, but also become extremely good at holding back the intent to kill, while at the same time plotting to assassinate a target in a single shot. Just the demand to maintain two contradictory intentions at the same time was enough to split the minds of lesser marksman Mech pilots. There were many other details that contributed to the instant defeat of the Azure Vanquisher. For example, the expert hero Mech might not excel at defense, but it should have been much more difficult for another mid-range expert Mech to penetrate its resonance shield in a single pass. The strange energy beam type was the main reason why the Azure Vanquisher's most important defensive measure had failed so easily. Whatever damage it inflicted onto a target seemed to form a natural counter to true resonance. How many crazy advantages does the enemy-ranged Mech possess? If only a single of the aforementioned factors applied to Venerable Davia Stark and the Amaranto, then the combination would only be slightly more concerning than normal. However, the combination of all of these factors produced a package that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Fridayman expert pilot's eyes shook with apprehension. Though powerful soldiers and warriors like himself did not experience any fear, he was still capable of feeling concern for his fellow comrades. Alarm surged through his mind when he imagined his other colleagues succumbing to the lethal beams of this insidious, long-ranged Mech. He hastily transmitted his findings to his colleagues over their exclusive communication channel. Watch out for the Amaranto's shot. The enemy expert pilot can strike without warning and punch through your resonance shield in an instant. You have to suppress the Amaranto at all costs. We are already on it, someone spoke. Our analysts have already figured out that it takes a lot of time and preparation for the enemy expert pilot to prepare such a powerful and precise attack. The enemy won't be able to take us by surprise if we keep her and her expert Mech busy enough. The response from the sundered phalanx came quickly when the Amaranto locked onto a different target. As soon as the expert rifleman Mech exposed a tiny part of itself, two fast and power resonance-empowered energy beams launched from within the Titan shield of an orbital space station and struck the armored enclosure on the Gorgonean. What was remarkable about these mighty energy beams was that they had been fired at virtually the same time from the same muzzle at the same angle. Venerable Stark already recognized the massive threat to her expert Mech, but just because she wanted her Amaranto to dodge away did not mean that her machine could accomplish this in an instant. A massive amount of heat and light exploded from the hull section as the laser beam unleashed destruction over the entire area. The power of that laser beam was not lower than the previous shot fired by the Amaranto. It turned out that the champions of the sundered phalanx were no longer willing to sit back. The first Fridayman expert Mech to fire against the attackers also happened to be an expert rifleman Mech, and one that excelled in long-ranged precision attacks no less. The biggest difference between it and the Amaranto was that the former was controlled by a genuine high-tier expert pilot. Venerable Kazher Rizkin of the 5642nd Blackened Reaper Mech Division was one of the more famous and successful war heroes of the Komodo War. Her skill along with her powerful resonance strength had allowed her to pick off one vulnerable Hexer expert Mech after another. Years later, her skills had not regressed in the slightest. Her ability to take Venerable Stark by surprise was a testament of her long-ranged assassination capabilities. What was different from before was that the sundered phalanx assigned a brand new expert Mech to her, when she arrived in the Red Ocean. The Star of Liberation shared many common design elements with the Amaranto. As an expert mech that excelled at long-ranged attacks, its armor and flight capabilities were not that impressive. The true star of the show was the custom, high-end Slipstream rifle at its disposal. Master Johnny Bates led the development of the Star of Liberation. It was already a given that he would design a standard laser positron energy rifle that was completely tailored to Venerable Rizkin and her expert mech. It only took one pull of the trigger to put the Amaranto into a lot of distress. What was even scarier about the Star of Liberation was that its Slipstream rifle needed much less time to discharge another powerful double-beam attack. In addition, since Venerable Rizkin was much more powerful than Venerable Stark in terms of resonance strength, she was able to amplify the damage output of her Star of Liberation to a much higher degree. As Venerable Rizkin tracked the Amaranto like a hawk, the latter was no longer able to pull off any further cheap shots. Whenever the Amaranto maneuvered behind the hull of the Gorgonaean and attempted to open fire at another important target, the Star of Liberation never failed to preempt Venerable Stark's actions by firing first. Several powerful energy explosions struck the Gorgonaean, though this time the Star of Liberation's attacks first had to chew through her directional energy shields. Normally, the powerful energy shield generators that the Larkinson clan had recently installed aboard her capital ships should have been able to resist an entire bombardment, but the Star of Liberation was too unreasonable. The double laser positron beam attacks were empowered by so much true resonance that they seemed to overpower the ship-grade energy shields through sheer willpower. The Gorgonaeans' engineering crews panicked as the energy shield generators they took care of already showed signs of reaching their limits. They weren't supposed to reach this state so soon. "I am not going to make this easy on you, Stark." Venerable Kazir Rizkin grinned inside the cockpit of her considerably more luxurious mech. "I will not only deprive you of any further chances to snipe my comrades in arms, but I will also take shots at your own side's expert mech. I can do everything that you can do, but better." This was not an empty boast. The many Hexer expert mech that had fallen at her hands was the greatest proof of her competence. The opening shots of the Amaranto and the Star of Liberation triggered other expert mechs into action. Those that were solely equipped with melee weapons still had to sit tight, but those with ranged weapons had no excuse anymore. The ranged expert mechs of the Hex Army and the Golden Skull Alliance began to fire at different targets and achieved immediate results. For example, the recently completed Carnair fielded by the Cross clan already exhibited a faint shadow of the Mars. The Carnair was the personal machine of Venerable Imland Cross, one of the mech pilots that had been lucky enough to break through during the climax of the Purgatory campaign. Even though Venerable Imland was just a low-tier expert pilot, the treatment he received from the Cross clan was extravagant. It couldn't be helped. The Cross clan suffered from a shortage of expert pilots and had a lot of money to spare. Benedict Cortez, who was still a senior mech designer at the time, expressly set out to emulate the firepower of the Mars, but in a much more manageable package. Though the renowned Larkinson mech designers did not take part in its development, the Carnair still turned into a powerful work. Read novel Fulme. The expert mech possessed two standout features. First, Benedict integrated a weaker and more modest version of the original magma vein system into its design. This allowed the expert mech to channel and wield a lot more energy in a much more efficient manner. Second, the Carnair came equipped with a transphasic dual-type energy rifle. As Venerable Imland Cross targeted a space station that fell under the protection of a Titan shield, he resonated with his expert mech and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Despite the fact that the space station in question still boasted a healthy Titan shield, the Carnair's resonance-empowered positron beam only partially collided against the powerful energy barrier. More than a quarter of the deadly particles of the original beam seemed to behave as if the thick Titan shield did not exist and passed right through without any issue. This took some of the crew manning the stations of the orbital fortress by surprise. Before they could do anything else, the weakened but still potent energy beam struck an armored turret. The same behavior happened again. While a significant proportion of the positron beam damaged the outer layers of the turret, a part of the stream of positrons continued to pass right through solid alloys before they eventually unleashed their potent destructive potential onto the critical internals of the defensive fixture. The powerful turret that had put a decent amount of pressure on the starships of the Hex army lost all of its functions, even though its frontal armor was not entirely breached. Watch out. That expert Mech has a transphasic weapon, and not a weak one at that. The Cross clan invested over 350 grams of face water to provide transphasic capabilities to the Carnair. And this was a pretty luxurious treatment for a machine assigned to a low-tier expert pilot. If not for the fact that the Cross clan still had more face water than they knew what to do with it, the Crossers would have never been so willing to allocate so much of this strategic substance to a single machine. The Carnair's transphasic energy rifle that Benedict had developed in cooperation with Melman Advanced Systems possessed enough face water to allow its potent beams to move past the Titan shields deployed by the defenders and several meters of thick alloys depending on their defensive properties. Many conventional defensive measures lost a lot of their power when struck by potent transphasic attacks. While armor and energy shields still played a major role in mitigating the damage potential of attacks like the ones launched by the Carnair, it became clear that the mere existence of this new attack method had the potential to change human warfare forever. The only defenses that can completely block transphasic attacks are true resonance and transphasic defense systems. Everything else is just waiting for death. This was a bit of an exaggeration. The orbital fortresses that made up the strongest parts of the Cossack ring would not go down just because it was targeted by a few mechs armed with transphasic weapon systems. Their massive Titan shield generators were buried deep within the interior of the enormous constructs. A huge amount of walls and other obstacles stood in the way between these critical defensive systems and attacks launched from afar. The Carnair's effectiveness on this massive battlefield was therefore limited at this stage. The most that venerable Imland Cross could do was knock out the turrets and occasionally the mechs that were hiding behind the cover of intact Titan shields. Other ranged expert mechs exhibited greater effectiveness. So much hardware, so much to burn. It's been a long time since I have entered a target-rich environment. Venerable Isabel Coton had been waiting for this moment a long time. Ever since she broke through during the Purgatory campaign and received her own expert mech a year later, she had been looking forward to making a huge impact in the next major battle involving the Larkinson clan. It was a pity that the Larkinsons spent 5 long years in Davut. Aside from sending out modest batches of mech units to fulfill mercenary missions, the Larkinson clan did not encounter any hostilities. Venerable Isabel therefore became a lot happier when the clan initially announced its participation in Operation Saturday Market. Though her personal resentment towards the Friday men was not that strong, to be honest, she valued this confrontation because it could serve as an excellent opportunity for her to explore her power and search the limits of her current strength. I've never been able to fulfill my duty to the fullest since I received you, Promethea. You can cheer up now, because these Friday men have been generous enough to give us plenty of targets to burn. Though the Promethea was not a masterwork mech and still had a lot to grow until it became a third-order living mech, it had already reached a state of development that made it as responsive as a pet. The expert mech liked what Venerable Isabel was conveying. The Promethea became so excited at the thought of fulfilling the role it was made for that it began to resonate stronger with its expert pilot. A flame-like purple corona surrounded the black and purple mech. Both Venerable Isabel and the Promethea wanted to make their first proper debut in battle as memorable as possible, and the best way to do that was to disrupt the enemy as much as possible. Isabel scanned the battlefield and selected her first target. The Promethea's custom Ignitron Luminar crystal assault rifle did not possess the greatest accuracy compared to the Amaranto's instrument of vengeance, but it should not be a challenge for it to strike a relatively stationary target from a distance. As she and her expert Mech locked on to a defensive platform that was a bit larger than a Corvette and boasted 3 powerful and accurate laser turrets, the Ignitron in the arms of the Promethea fired a relatively thin and modest positron beam at the target. The positron beam dealt a decent amount of damage on impact, but even if it was empowered by true resonance, the strike hardly managed to breach the cheap but abundant structural armor. This was the normal result of attacking one of the thousands of defensive platforms that orbited Pima Prime V. Each of them were relatively cheap and low quality, but much tougher than Mech's, because they traded mobility for a lot of mass. Even if expert Mechs, such as the Amaranto and the Carnair, were able to knock them out with attacks that were strong enough, it was not worth it for their expert pilots to waste their willpower on destroying these ordinary targets. If not for the fact that all of the ranged Mech units of Task Force Fury were preoccupied with breaking open orbital fortresses first, these defensive platforms would have long been torn apart in quick succession. Now, Venerable Isabel was making a head start on their destruction by targeting them first. The strangest part about her approach was that she did not target the defensive platform any further after striking it once. The construct was still completely operational aside from suffering a bit of damage to its structure. Isabel just took a brief look at the damaged section before she became satisfied with what she and the Promethea managed to accomplish. "It begins." Isabel smirked and turned the Ignitron towards an adjacent defensive platform. The expert ranged Mech fired another understated resonance-empowered positron beam. Isabel did not even deliberately aim her weapon at one of the turrets or any weak points of the defensive platform. Even if her attack ended up striking solid armor plating, Isabel still moved on to attacking another target. She continually sped up her attacks. It only took a few seconds at most to shift her aim to another target and accumulate enough energy and resonance to fire another attack at a defensive platform. Initially, the Friday men didn't pay much attention to the Promethea. Compared to the much more threatening Amaranto, that was capable of firing immensely powerful and destructive energy beams, the attacks launched by the Larkinson clan's latest expert rifleman Mech did not even manage to cripple its targets. It was more than 30 seconds before numerous Friday men began to feel that something was wrong. The crew manning the defensive platforms and the officers who supervised them from remote began to receive increasingly alarming notifications. First, the heat levels of the defensive platforms started to rise at a drastic rate. Next, numerous systems and components closest to the impact site started to malfunction. Finally, the crew members discovered to their horror that the defensive platforms struck by the Promethea had actually started to burn. "This is impossible. Hardly anything here is flammable. We only got struck by a single positron beam attack that only blasted a chunk of the outer armor. Our sensors did not detect that our station had been doused with any propellant." There was no logical explanation why the defensive platforms slowly began to get engulfed in flames. It was only after ruling out every other possibility that the Friday men finally reached the right conclusion. It's the Larkinson clan's new expert Mech. The Promethea is the chief culprit. As far as Larkinson expert Mech went, the Promethea was one of the simpler ones. It was not loaded with many features and did not possess a complicated design. There were 3 major differences that set it apart from other ranged Mechs. First, it was equipped with flamethrowers that possessed a lot of destructive potential at close range. Second, the Ignitron integrated a resonating alloy called ARB-34. This artificial alloy happened to be highly compatible with Venerable Isabel Khotin. Its main function was to amplify Isabel's flame domain and imbue each energy attack with burning properties. This meant that when an energy beam struck a target, a fire would start that could slowly burn through solid matter that should ordinarily not be flammable in a given environment. Thus, the third and principal reason why the defensive platforms burned was because Venerable Isabel willed them to become engulfed in flames. Perhaps Venerable Isabel would have a hard time setting flames on an expert Mech due to the interference of an enemy expert pilot's force of will, but defensive platforms enjoyed no such luxury. "I haven't come close to reaching my limit," Venerable Isabel taunted as she continued to resonate with her expert Mech and its special Luminar crystal rifle. Resonating with ARB-34 did not strain her a lot, which meant that she could not only launch a lot of resonance-empowered attacks without tiring herself out, but also maintain a lot of different flames at the same time. Before anyone knew it, over 40 defensive platforms had already caught fire. The ones that the Promethea struck first had already been rendered useless, as the flames had burned too many critical modules such as the power reactor or the turrets. The enemies that observed how the Promethea continued to burn through the defensive platform, as if she was igniting a wildfire along the Cossack ring, began to experience a lot more fear towards this simple expert rifleman Mech. Stop the Promethea. It can single-handedly gut the Cossack ring if it continues to spread its flames. As soon as the Fridaymen properly recognized the threat posed by the Promethea, numerous expert ranged Mechs began to fire at its position along the hull of the Wild Torch. The fleet carrier that the Wild Fighter Association had once awarded to the Larkinson clan began to suffer a lot of strain and damage as a torrent of powerful attacks bombarded her directional shields and damaged her exterior fixtures. The Promethea even suffered a close shave as the Star of Liberation briefly turned its attention away from suppressing the Amaranto and fired a casual but destructive shot in the other Larkinson expert Mech's direction. The experienced Venerable Rizkin quickly saw through Venerable Isabel's power. "Your fire trick is surprisingly useful, but how much concentration does it take to burn what isn't supposed to be burned?" The more suppression directed towards the Promethea, the harder it became for Venerable Isabel to maintain the fires she had sparked on all of the defensive platforms struck by the ignitrone. The purple flames that seemed to be unstoppable earlier had become a lot feebler now that Venerable Isabel needed to direct a lot more attention towards evasion. While the Star of Liberation couldn't direct much attention away from the Amaranto, other Sundered Phalanx expert Mechs took over the duty of suppressing the Promethea whenever possible. The biggest threats that Venerable Isabel faced after the Star of Liberation were the Tensars. As one of the recent mid-tier expert Mechs designed by Master Tokweman Huron and Master Johnny Bates, the twin expert rifleman Mech synchronized their actions to a flawless degree and always struck at their targets from different angles at the exact same time. With the help of their Slipdream rifles, the Arma Tensar and Phila Tensar easily inflicted a lot of energy damage with every discharge. Read novel Fulme. If only one of the Mechs attacked at a time, then Venerable Isabel was still confident she could block the attacks with the resonance shields of her Promethea. However, she had seen how the simultaneous strikes of the Tensar frequently inflicted damage that equaled, or in some cases, surpassed the normal attacks of the Star of Liberation. Those identical expert riflemen, Mechs truly have the capital to challenge high-tier expert Mechs. Considering that the Promethea was just a mid-tier expert Mech, and one that did not even excel at defense, there was no way that Venerable Isabel dared to make any aggressive moves when she was locked down by both Venerable Anastasia Choi and Venerable Geraldino Famus. "We're keeping our eyes on you, Promethea. We're not going to allow you to burn down the Cossack ring any further." The Promethea was a poor matchup against the Tensars. One of the biggest weaknesses of Luminar crystal weapons was that Vess had yet to figure out how to integrate face water into them without causing catastrophic disasters. Due to this, the Promethea could only overcome defenses such as Titan shields and resonance shields the hard way. There was no way the expert Mech could overcome either of them in its current state. The Carnair was at least able to partially bypass Titan shields with its transphasic dual-type rifle. As for trying to take down the Tensars once they became exposed, Venerable Isabel did not even attempt to accomplish this on her own. Not only did they perfectly cover for each other's weaknesses, their resonance strengths were significantly more powerful than her own, allowing them to easily snuff out the flames she set before they even had a chance to burn. Despite all of the suppression directed towards the Promethea, Venerable Isabel did not feel too bad about her current state. Being able to hold down both Tensars is a huge profit. If the Tensars tried their best to hinder the Promethea from setting more fires, then these potent expert Mech weren't directing much of their firepower towards other targets. The only downside was that the Wild Torch came under increasing fire from not only the Tensars, but many other Freidaemon Mechs as well. Our ship is taking way too much damage. We can't endure so much firepower. Before the Larkinson clan moved any other ships in the way, the Hexers already moved their combat carriers in the way. Keep attracting the attention of the enemy's champions. General Aliski Victrix communicated to the Larkinson clan's expert pilots. The more they are threatened by you, the more they will leave our regular Mech forces alone. We shall assist you in any way possible. The Hexers did not expose their own combat carriers to danger merely because they valued the Larkinson clan and felt the need to be charitable all of a sudden. This was all part of a greater strategy that aimed to direct as much attention of the enemy elites to the Golden Skull Alliance as possible. The Hexers hadn't brought that much mid- and high-tier expert Mechs to the fight, so they couldn't fight against the most powerful enemy champions on an equal basis. Therefore, the amount of heat that the Amaranto and the Promethea generated through their actions was highly beneficial to the overall attack plan. The trajectory of the battle played out exactly how the planners envisioned. Even though the Gaugers figured out the enemy's strategy, they had no choice but to direct their more powerful ranged expert Mechs to suppress the Amaranto and the Promethea. The Sundered Phalanx had already tried and failed to achieve effective suppression. Weaker expert Mechs did not pose a sufficient threat to the two thorny Larkinson expert Mechs. Their power levels were not sufficient, and their firepower couldn't threaten the defenses of their targets. As important Mechs, the Larkinson clan invested a lot in bolstering their defenses. Vess had especially directed a lot of attention towards this issue when he upgraded the design of the Amaranto. Previously, the Amaranto functioned as a glass cannon. Its firepower was fearsome, but its defenses were abysmal. Though Vess did not wish to make his first proper expert rifleman Mech stray from its original design concept of pursuing extreme firepower, he still found plenty of ways to strengthen the armor and the resonating shield of the Amaranto. Money solved many problems, and investing a huge amount of money in a high-quality lightweight armor system massively increased the survivability of the Amaranto. The instance in the past where the Amaranto was unable to snipe enemy expert Mechs because of its fragile shell was in the past. The Amaranto version 2.0 was not afraid of accruing a couple of dents. As more and more space stations started to lose their Titan shields due to getting focused upon by tens of thousands of Hexer-ranged Mechs, the Sundered Phalanx Mech units started to suffer real damage. Bunker Mechs, Cannoneer Mechs, Rifleman Mechs, and other Mechs fell by the hundreds, and the rate was only increasing over time as the distance between the two sides continued to shrink. Though the expert Mechs from both sides performed the flashiest, the role of ordinary expert Mechs was not negligible. Many famed Sundered Phalanx Mech divisions showed their excellence during this phase of the battle. For example, the 5,642nd Blackened Reapers, where Venerable Kazir Riskin hailed from, was a renowned long-range Mech division that excelled in long-ranged precision warfare. The Mech division fielded powerful cannoneer Mechs that launched relatively slow but ultra-heavy Gauss rounds that were best at breaking open starships. The Blackened Reapers also employed numerous rifleman Mechs that were so precise that they could even knock out individual exterior parts from the hull of a moving starship as long as they became exposed. Then there was the artillery-oriented 5640th Witch Shatterers, which the Black Reapers viewed as a sister Mech division. As their name suggested, the Witch Shatterers had been founded with the idea of crushing the Hexers on the battlefield. Their artillery Mechs tended to be equipped with heavy Gauss cannons, heavy ballistic cannons, and missile launchers. While the Witch Shatterers did not excel at long-ranged precision bombardment like the Blackened Reapers, they did not need to be good at this aspect. Their main purpose in battle was to put a huge amount of pressure onto the larger and less maneuverable assets of their opponents. Each Mech pilot possessed an abundant amount of experience in bombarding starships in space and shelling enemy strongholds and positions on land. At this stage of the battle, the thousands of artillery Mechs of the Witch Shatterers put an enormous amount of pressure on the starships of the Hex Army's Special Task Force for this operation. Those Witch Shatterers are too foul. Many of them are holing up safely within the confines of the Titan shields of their fortified space stations, while we are losing our combat carriers at an alarming pace. General Aliski Victrix and the other Hexer officers recognized the enormous threat posed by the Witch Shatterers, but they could do little but bear with the situation. As long as the forces under their command managed to get close enough to the enemy battle lines, then many of those heavy artillery Mechs would turn into sitting ducks to the aggressive Hexer melee Mechs. The attacking units just needed to cross the remaining distance. Fortunately, the Hexers brought their own artillery regiments and divisions. Though the Hex Army's Mech doctrine did not put as much of an emphasis on ranged combat as the Fridaymen, that did not mean that the Hexers were bad in this aspect. The Hexers had already known what they faced in advance due to the intelligence leaks and the information retrieved by the spies planted in Pima Prime. Though the Hexer artillery Mech models weren't as powerful as the transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II, the tens of thousands that the Hexers had brought to this battle was exacting a huge price on the Titan shields that protected the orbital space stations. The Hexers even tuned their artillery Mechs to deal the most optimal amount of damage against the Gage Dynasty's Titan shields. One of the most valuable secrets that the Fridaymen behind Tristan had leaked was the alleged properties of the Titan shield models employed by the Gage Dynasty in Pima Prime. Not every shield generator was the same. Some excelled in resisting energy attacks, while others were more efficient in blocking physical attacks. The Titan shield models utilized by the Gaugers were primarily attuned to resist massive burst attacks launched by warship-grade weapons. The idea was that friendly Mechs could still put up a good fight against enemy Mechs, but if alien warships dropped by one day, the Cossack Ring was meant to blunt their massive firepower as much as possible. While these Titan shield generators also worked pretty well against smaller caliber weapons, they seemed to perform less efficiently against sustained or continuous attacks. The Hexer artillery Mechs armed with energy weapons took advantage of this minor shortcoming by firing beams that lasted several more seconds at a time. The Mechs accumulated heat a lot faster because of this, but the ranged Mechs compensated for this by lowering the power settings in order to make this firing mode more bearable. As a result, a clear difference had formed between the ranged Mechs from both sides. While the Fridaymen ranged Mechs focused primarily on inflicting concentrated burst damage so that they could punch through the weak points of their targets, the Hexer ranged Mechs primarily sought to overload the powerful Titan shields by inflicting sustained area damage. In any case, the bubble generated by Titan shields was so enormous that it was impossible for any of the Hexer Mech pilots to miss their shots. Our space stations are collapsing one by one. Our Mechs are slowly becoming more exposed. Don't mind this. We can rebuild our orbital fortress after we have survived this battle. I will gladly sacrifice the entire Cosmic Ring as long as we are able to beat off the Hexers in the end. Stand fast and keep focusing on reducing their Mechs as much as possible. As the invading forces proceeded to make progress, more and more Mechs became involved in the fight. The time for the first melee Mech units to clash against each other was drawing closer. As the fight began to get hotter and hotter, the amount of casualties suffered by both sides increased at a faster rate. Surprisingly, the amount of lives lost by both sides were fairly tame. Many of the combat carriers of the Hex Army and the Golden Skull Alliance were already being run by skeleton crews. If the starships suffered so much damage that they no longer became operable, then a small number of crew members could still evacuate with ease. Even the artillery Mech stationed inside the bunkers still had a way out. As long as they managed to flee in space, they could rely on standalone floater modules or other auxiliary flight equipment to continue their participation in battle. Of course, these exposed artillery Mechs attracted a lot of enemy fire as well. Their large size, along with their awful flight characteristics in space, meant that it became easy for Mech units, such as the Blackened Reapers, to demolish their frames. As a result, hundreds of cockpits ejected out into space with each passing second. While the enemy would love to shoot them down as well, any firepower spent on killing a bunch of Mech pilots that did not pose any threat by themselves meant that far more threatening enemies would be able to continue to do their jobs. As a result, the ejected cockpits, escape pods, and evacuation vehicles launched by both sides were mostly left alone. The Friday Men and Hexers had fought against each other during the Komodo War so many times that they had already developed an unspoken understanding about this matter. It was not too late to round up the surviving enemies after winning the main battle. "How are we doing so far, General?" Vess asked as his expression grew a lot more serious as the fight had reached a much hotter state. "We're losing a fair amount of valuable combat carriers as this artillery duel proceeds. Soon enough, we won't have enough ships left to proceed with our Trailblazer expedition." Read novel for me. Vess had already ordered his guards to send his children back to their mother. Though he would have loved to keep Marvane and the others around to teach them the reality of warfare, it was too tiresome for him to supervise 3 energetic toddlers. The little devils distracted him so much that he felt it was best to foist them onto Gloriana. Now that the bridge of the spirit of Bentheim had become a lot calmer, Vess could finally focus on what was important. "The problem is not as severe as it looks, Vess," the projection of General Verl replied as he continued to monitor the unfolding battle. "We have made sure to instruct the crews of our combat carriers to fall out of the battle line before they have lost total maneuverability. The ships are still operational to a degree, and whatever holes have formed in their hulls can quickly be patched up during emergency repairs. As long as they are still FTL capable, we can restore them at our leisure." "That won't help us if we lose this battle," Vess grimaced. "We will have to abandon a lot of hulls if we have to flee this star system. In fact, even if we win, we still have to leave behind a lot of derelict starships and Mechs. There simply wasn't enough time and capacity to salvage the enormous debris that would undoubtedly litter the orbit of Pima Prime V. The huge amount of broken matter would serve as a consolation prize for the Gaugers regardless if they won or lost the battle. Of course, as long as the Hexers demolished most if not all of Pima Prime's industries and infrastructure, then the Gage dynasty would not be able to do anything useful with the salvage for a long time. This was the ultimate goal that the Hex Federation set out to accomplish. General Verl soon supplied Vess with an update. "The Sundered Phalanx have increasingly redirected their fire against the Mechs on our side. It has become a lot more viable to shoot at our Mechs and the Mechs of the Hex Army at this range. The Gaugers know that destroying the opposing starships is not conducive to securing a victory." "Damn." The damage we are taking is still manageable, sir. While our Transcendent Punisher Mark Roman II are more powerful than the equivalent models utilized by the Hex army, they are much tougher and better protected. Rather than expending a lot of effort to destroy our relatively limited number of bunker mechs, the Fridaymen mech units are mostly focusing their firepower on the more abundant Hexer bunker mechs. Vess looked at the large projected map and studied the lines and arrows that represented where different mech units directed their fire towards. Since the Golden Skull Alliance's starships were partially taking shelter behind an enormous screen of Hexer vessels, it was already fairly difficult to target his Transcendent Punishers. This gave Vess a bit of relief. The Hexers were upholding their end of agreement. After all, the Hex Federation possessed a lot of shipbuilding capacity and could replace their lost combat carriers a lot easier than the Golden Skull Alliance. "When will we start the next phase of our deployment?" Vess asked. "It won't be long now, sir. We will wait for General Aliski Victrix to dispatch the mechs under her command first before we follow suit. Our mid-range mechs and our melee mechs are fully prepared to fly out in the open and meet the enemy on the open battlefield. Our pilots have all trained for this. The difference this has made is not that obvious at this stage of the battle, but once our melee mech units collide against that of the enemy, it is highly likely that we will be able to gain an immediate advantage." Vess silently agreed with this assessment. The actual performance of the Sundered Phalanx mech units did not veer too far outside of his expectations. The intelligence they gathered on the enemy was accurate so far, and it truly did not seem that the mechs fielded by the Gaugers were unreasonably powerful. However, there were still a lot of variables that could throw a wrench in all of their plans. "How about the Ace mechs?" he asked. "We have not managed to detect any sign of the Neo Amadeus so far. Until the Gage dynasty releases it onto the battlefield, we are not in a hurry to present our Mars either." Vess frowned in thought. The Mars should be powerful enough to knock out several intact orbital space fortifications in quick succession. No matter how fast the Neo Amadeus can respond, Patriarch Reginald can easily inflict a lot of mass destruction on the Sundered Phalanx and the Cossack Ring in a short amount of time. Trust me, we are constantly thinking about this move as well. The reason why we haven't allowed the Mars to let loose is because we do not have a total guarantee that our Ace Mech is able to defeat the enemy Ace Mech in battle. Every detail counts. If the Mars expends a significant amount of combat resources against weaker targets, then that might eventually cause Saint Reginald to lose his long-awaited duel. We cannot afford to let this possibility come to pass. Right now, the Hex Army and the Golden Skull Alliance were enduring a lot of pain, but not to the point of demanding a change in plans. General Aliski Victrix and General Verl still believed that they were on track to win this battle without the intervention of Ace Mechs. "We have also been withholding a surprise," General Verl mentioned. "So far, all of the ranged mechs armed with luminar crystal weapons have limited their damage output to laser beam and positron beam attacks. While they do a good amount of damage to material targets, their efficiency against energy shields and Titan shields are not that great. We will soon change that by ordering all of them to switch to disruptor beams." The armored form of Vess sat up a little straighter in his seat. "Won't that attract a lot more heat towards our mechs?" General Verl slowly nodded. "We will, but it is not exactly a big secret that we possess this capability. The only reason why we have yet to employ our disruptor beams is because we did not want to attract more fire towards our starships. Now that the Sundered Phalanx are increasingly directing their fire towards opposing mechs, we are not as concerned anymore. The shock value will also be greatest." The Sundered Phalanx put a lot of faith in the Cossack Ring. If the value of the orbital defensive works plummeted in a short amount of time, the Fridayman mech units would have to make a lot of hasty decisions. This would be the moment when Task Force Fury and the Golden Skull Alliance would launch their main offensive. Vess grew hotter as he anticipated this crucial moment. He continued to observe the main plot, but also directed his attention to the current states of all of his key Mechs and Mech pilots. When the crucial moment arrived, General Verl finally issued the key command. Begin firing disruptor beams. Focus your fire on the remaining Titan shields. Once they are down, leave it up to the Hexer Mechs to finish the job. Thousands of ranged Mechs, hailing from the Larkinson clan, and the Glory Seekers did as instructed. It only took a brief delay for their weapons to switch to another attack phase, Pattern Crystal. Once the ones responsible for converting electrical energy into powerful disruptor beams had been set, the beams the ranged Mechs unleashed onto their targets immediately stood out from the ubiquitous laser and positron beams flying across space. Our Titan shield has lost 6% integrity all of a sudden, a frightened Fridayman engineer warned. What? Confirm that. It's true. Wait, we've lost 3% integrity just now. The enemy's energy attacks are taking an enormous toll on our Titan shield. We won't last more than 2 minutes at this rate. Damn, we already received a briefing about the effectiveness of the Larkinson clan's unique disruptor beam technology, but the higher-ups never told us that they would hit this hard. Technology constantly progressed. The efficiency and effectiveness of disruptor beams was no longer at the same level anymore. Seeing how much his Mech legions depended on luminar crystal technology, Vess had invested a lot of effort into improving and optimizing every attack phase crystal. By applying a part of the high-level knowledge that he had obtained from the MTA, Vess had been able to update the designs of every attack phase crystal, making a number of them considerably more effective than before. The Friday Coalition did not fully account for the effect of these improvements. The Larkinson clan had made considerably more progress in upgrading its tech than most analysts could foresee. The previous exchange of fire had already broken open a fair number of orbital fortresses, but the remaining strongholds of the Cosmic Ring still offered a fair amount of defensive advantages to the sundered phalanx. The sudden switch to disruptor beams made the remaining fortifications a lot more vulnerable. The Titan shields formed such an integral part of their defenses that losing this layer of protection at an accelerated pace rendered the Cosmic Ring irrelevant a lot sooner than the Friday men wished. At the same time, the ranged Mech started to fire disruptor beams. Many melee Mech units finally ceased to hide behind their starships and surged forward at great speed. The Mech of the Hex army moved first. Roughly half of Task Force Fury's Mech units played no role in this battle so far, which frustrated their Mech pilots to no end. Now that they received permission to let loose, the predominantly female Mech pilots whooped and cheered as they charged forth without any fear. Slaughter the Friday men, a Hexer Mech officer roared as her Valkyrie Redeemer Mark Roman II raised its spear in encouragement. Death to the enemy! Death to the enemy! The heavier and more solid Hexer Mech advanced straight ahead, while the lighter and more maneuverable Mechs swung around the flanks in order to look for opportunities at oblique angles. The massive wave of Hexer Mechs surging ahead of their motherships presented an intimidating sight. The real battle is about to start. As the Hex army, and subsequently the Golden Skull Alliance, finally put their melee Mech units into play, the sundered phalanx did not remain still. The Godgers sent forth their own melee Mech units in order to stop the enemy from charging too close to whatever was left of the Cosmic Ringreed novel Fulmi. Though a lot of orbital space stations had already lost their Titan shields and most of their turrets, the enormous metal constructs were still intact mostly. It was not profitable for the attacking to continue to break down these huge fortifications. It took way too many concentrated volleys to blast the sturdy space stations to pieces. Hence, even if the space stations had lost almost all functionality, their physical mass still provided the sundered phalanx with a considerable amount of hard cover where friendly ranged Mechs could shelter behind. Just like how the Hex Army and the Golden Skull Alliance's ranged Mech units continued to utilize nearby starships as cover, the sundered phalanx ranged Mechs still depended a lot on these remaining hulks to fight, while minimizing their exposure to enemy fire. All of that would instantly become invalid if the melee mechs dispatched by the Hexers and the Golden Scullers managed to get into point-blank range. Therefore, the Sundered Phalanx deployed their melee, meched out in force, despite the fact that they would be exposing themselves to a lot of ranged attacks as a result. Certain people, such as Vess, sighed in relief when they saw that the enemy had redirected their fire away from starships. The only mechs that continued to concentrate their firepower on the combat vessels of the invading forces were the heavy artillery mechs of the Witch Shatterers and other siege-oriented mech units. Read novel Fulmi. Though Vess would have preferred it if the Eye of Ilvain focused their heavy firepower on the Witch Shatterers, he understood that it was better for his transcendent Punisher mark, Roman II, to shoot down the incoming waves of enemy mech units. This is going to be a lot more interesting. Meow, Lucky echoed. The gem cat floated next to where Vess was seated and remained fairly alert. Do you think our mech units will be able to overpower their Fridayman counterparts in the upcoming clashes? Meow meow. Ha 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 ha, you're right. The Godgers shouldn't be prepared for everything that we have in store for them. I am especially looking forward to the performance of the Battle Criers and the Sword Maidens in this engagement. The avatars of myth and the flagrant vandals shouldn't be too bad either. A lot of years had passed since the Larkinson clan fought its last major battle. Every Mech Legion underwent a qualitative and quantitative evolution. Unlike years before, the design department had made sure that every Larkinson Mech Legion came equipped with a synergistic collection of exclusive mech models. Along with the mech doctrines and exclusive strategies and tactics that the servicemen designed around these signature mech models, the Larkinson mech units gained much more power from synergy, coordination, and teamwork than before. As Vess studied the battle map, he noticed that the flanking units of the Hex Army and the Golden Skull Alliance were about to collide against their opposition first, despite the fact that they had to swing around. The flanking units traditionally consisted of faster and more maneuverable mechs, so Vess wasn't surprised to see that the Flagrant Vandals become the first Larkinson Mech Legion that was about to collide against their direct opposition. Taking control of the flanks will provide us with a lot of initiative. While it was important for his forces to be able to achieve a breakthrough in the center, if the elite Sundered Phalanx Mech divisions were tougher than expected, then it was crucial to take control of the flanks. If the Flagrant Vandals and their Hexer equivalents were able to overpower their immediate opposition, then it was hard to imagine the Godgers being able to regain the upper hand in those circumstances. Once our flanking units are free to do what they want, they can spread an untold amount of chaos. They could either dive towards the remains of the Cossack Ring to destroy a lot of vulnerable ranged mechs, or circle around and strike the Sundered Phalanx mech formations from the sides or the rear. Vess turned his attention to the right flank in particular. He noticed that venerable Tusa Billingsley Larkinson had opted to accompany the hundreds of flagrant Vandal mechs approaching from this side. The number of Larkinson mechs looked awfully limited compared to the tens of thousands of Hexer mechs that moved ahead of the flagrant Vandals. However, Vess expected a lot from them. The number of mechs dispatched by the Friday men was a little less because the defending forces didn't quite have as many light mechs. This meant that as long as the Hexer light units could lock at least an equal number of Fridayman light units in place, the small but elite flagrant Vandal mech units could make use of their many advantages to quickly achieve local superiority. This could form a tipping point where the Hexers and the flagrant Vandals could continue to multiply their numerical advantage at an accelerated rate. Soon enough, the leading units from both sides began to attack each other. The mechs armed with light-ranged weapons opened fire on each other. Though their hit rates were so low that hardly any mech experienced any difficulties, this was just the opening move for both sides. It wasn't until the light skirmishers and other melee light mechs started to meet each other in the middle that the fight immediately reached another intensity. Tens of thousands of light Mechs on both the left flank and the right flank locked horns with each other. It was extremely difficult for light Mech units to maintain large and rigid formations under these circumstances, so they mostly didn't bother to make the attempt. The different units mostly broke up into smaller squads and fire teams in order to maximize their mobility, while at the same time maintaining at least some measure of coordination. Legion Commander Abbas Firelight commanded the flagrant vandals from the rear. Though he was still capable of piloting Mech and leading his troops into battle, he was no Kaesela Ingvar. As the Larkinson clan grew in size and scope, the responsibilities of a Legion commander became a lot more burdensome. Since the flagrant vandals predominantly favored skirmishes and independent action, Commander Firelight concluded that it was not that important for him to lead his troops at the front anymore. Despite not entering the cockpit anymore, Commander Firelight still maintained the respect from his men. He had spent a lot of time on shoring up his leadership and administrative skills in order to make sure that the flagrant vandals reached the best possible state to participate in battles like these. Now was the critical moment where Commander Firelight and many others would see whether their efforts yielded enough results. The commander leaned forward and studied the projections that displayed the incoming enemy Mech troops. The Hexers showed enough ability to hold back their immediate counterparts for the moment, so Commander Firelight was not in a hurry to send his flagrant vandals forward. Soon enough, he spotted a second wave of incoming light Mechs. The commander's eyes narrowed as the command net revealed that many of the incoming machines hailed from the 6,161st Nidden Vergers. The Nidden Vergers was one of the 6 modern Sundered Phalanx Mech divisions that the Golden Skull Alliance were supposed to target. As the Mechs that came from this new but powerful Mech division attempted to swing around to flank the flankers, the light Mechs dispatched by the Cross Clan and the Glory Seekers already moved forward to block the elites from messing up the Hex army units. Commander Firelight raised his armored hand and drew a few maneuvering orders with his finger. Work together with the Crossers and Glory Seekers to block the Nidden Vergers and stop their advance. Show what your training and your Mechs are worth and roll over the Sundered Phalanx light Mechs as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Take what is ours. According to the intelligence gathered on the mobility-oriented Mech division, the Nidden Vergers fielded a plethora of light Mechs among its different Mech regiments. The most iconic among them that defined the Nidden Vergers was a light Marauder Mech model called the Remo Targ. Designed predominantly by Master Zeoner Reisen of the Gage dynasty, the Remo Targ was a quick, agile, and versatile light Mech that could fight from fairly close range to point-blank range. It was quite similar to the Valkyrie Redeemer model in that regard, but the Remo Targ model was lighter and possessed much less shock value. Despite these shortcomings, the Remo Targ was not only a lot faster and more maneuverable than the Valkyrie Redeemer, but also infamously hard to hit in combat. The reason for that was because of Master Zeoner Reisen's design philosophy. She had dedicated her life to developing boosters and flight systems that excelled at performing an atypical form of evasion that involved brief, discreet, and instantaneous evasive maneuvers. Any Mechs equipped with her mobility systems typically exhibited stuttery movements that made it seem as if reality itself was lagging. Though Master Reisen's signature stutter boosters and stutter flight systems were notorious for being costlier and more expensive than more conventional alternatives, the results they achieved in battle made them worth the investment. Indeed, as the Crosser and Glory Seeker light Mechs began to tangle against the Remo Targs, the latter's stuttery and jerky movements caused a lot of attacks to miss. Our stutter movements always throw our enemies off guard, a Nidden Verger Mech pilot boasted. These paramilitary groups are fools if they think they can stand a chance against professional military forces such as ours. We have fought countless more battles than these pampered private sector goons. However, the Nidinvergers celebrated too soon. As the Remo Targs and the other Nidinverger mechs capable of performing stutter movements continued to dogfight against their opposition, they soon discovered that their foes quickly started to get accustomed to the jerky evasion moves. Despite the fact that the Remo Targs focused more on evasion than on launching attacks, they found that the enemy mechs were able to track them and land their attacks on their fragile frames with rapidly increasing proficiency. What? How come they have become so good at hitting our mechs? They must have trained to fight against us in simulations. That's impossible. Our Remo Targs are equipped with the latest generation stutter flight system. Our enemies shouldn't have learned about the evasion specs of our new mechs. Isn't the answer obvious? They figured our mechs out anyway. As the Remo Targs found themselves unable to shake off incoming attacks as well as they expected, the mech pilots pretty much confirmed that their opponents trained intensively to beat them in this battle. What exacerbated the problem for the Nidinvergers was that they were only partially familiar with the mech models fielded by their current opponents. The mechs of the Glory Seekers were easy enough to figure out, as many of them were regular staples of the Hex army. The mechs fielded by the Cross clan were relatively unknowns. The Crossers had used them sparingly in battle over the years. Aside from deploying them on mercenary missions, they hardly had any opportunity to fight against enemies. Hence the Sundered Phalanx knew too little about these fast but fairly robust light mechs. However, even as the Nidinvergers tried to cope against their opposition as best as possible by adopting radically different evasion patterns, the flagrant Vandals assigned to the right flank finally made their entry into battle. The Larkinson clan is finally moving in on us. Watch out for their annoying glows. The Friday Men and the Larkinsons were old enemies. Though the Sundered Phalanx had not fought against the Larkinson clan in many years, the former never forgot the defeat it suffered at the hands of the Larkinsons, who seemed to have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Stay sharp, don't take their mechs lightly, and make sure to firm up your minds. This is going to be a wild ride, men.